The following program contains material of an enlightening nature. Open-mindedness is advised.
Today, I want you to open your mind.
I've almost come to the conclusion that the story is so damning that the mass of people can't deal with it.
We are in process of developing a whole series of techniques to get people actually to love their servitude.
We face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, and insidious in method.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
To change the minds and the attitudes and the beliefs of the people of the world, and especially the United States, to bring about one world socialist totalitarian government.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
As you connect the dots between different people, organizations, places, religions, history, suddenly the picture starts to form. You don't connect the dots. It's just a mass of what's all this about.
The kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure.
Someone born in the United States is not more special than someone born in Mexico. Someone who is white is not more special than someone who is black. They're just vehicles for the consciousness to experience.
Brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill their promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people.
War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength.
Humans as a species are prone to amnesia. Those who do not remember the past are doomed to repeat it. It is thus imperative that these all-important matters be thoroughly explored and not left up to blind faith.
It's about time some of you got acquainted with the real hard truth.
We wanted to believe. We wanted to call out. On August 20th and September 5th, 1977, two spacecraft were launched from the Kennedy Space Flight Center, Florida. They were called Voyager. Each one carries a message.
I send greetings on behalf of the people of our planet. We step out of our solar system into the universe seeking only
a gold-plated record depicting images, music, and sounds of our planet, arranged so that it may be understood if ever intercepted by a technologically mature extraterrestrial civilization.
Hello from the children of planet Earth.
13 years after its launch, Voyager 1 passed the orbital plane of Neptune and essentially left our solar system. Within that time, there were no further messages sent, nor are any planned.
Welcome to The Secret Teachings. I am your host, Ryan Gable. Our website is www.thesecretteachings.info. That is www.thesecretteachings.info. This is part 2 of a back-to-back special edition of The Secret Teachings. If you missed last night, you missed a big show. And I would highly advise you to go to the website and you can access our archive and download that show for free. You don't have to sign up or give us any information. You simply click the link to the archive and you download last night's show. What we talked about, just to give you a little bit of a recap, because there was so much information divulged between myself and Mike D., who will also be joining me in about an hour for the second and third part of tonight's show. And what we really talked about, we focused on the concept of extraterrestrials. We defined what an extraterrestrial was. We defined what the term alien actually means. And we broke down the beliefs and the perceptions and the views that most people have on what a UFO is. Of course, if you're just joining us and maybe you've never heard me speak of the subject before, I'm not going to speak of these concepts and these ideas and a lot of these being facts, some of the stuff we've talked about. But I want to let people know that a UFO is an unidentified flying object. If you cannot identify it, then it is a UFO. And too many people have this perception that if it's called a UFO, whether you can identify it or not, then it automatically must be extraterrestrial in origin. It must come from some advanced intelligent species billions of light years away. And there are hundreds of billions of stars in our Milky Way, about 100 billion estimated. Hundreds of billions of planets in our Milky Way galaxy alone. There are hundreds and thousands of galaxies, millions just like ours, trillions of stars, trillions of planets in the viewable, in the visible universe. I can't even imagine what exists in other wavelengths and other dimensional forms that we cannot readily perceive with our senses. Vastness that is so unbelievably expansive that our minds have a very difficult time even comprehending it, which is one of the reasons I believe we give ourselves this sense of pride and we have a sense of arrogance. What I talked about last night, the ignorance of arrogance, or the arrogance of ignorance, I think it works either way, where we believe, we have these arguments that human beings are the only species, the only intelligent life, not just in the solar system, not just in the galaxy, but in the entirety of the universe. And as we make more scientific progress and we cast off the shackles of old dogmatic beliefs, you even begin to see how religious institutions such as the Vatican have now announced that they will baptize an extraterrestrial when we make contact, that the existence of these beings does not directly conflict with the beliefs in an all-knowing, all-powerful God. What they are doing is, in a way, covering their ass, but perhaps this could also be part of some grand deception, a slow desensitization to the concept of extraterrestrial beings, to the concept of advanced civilizations, wherever they may be in the universe. And as we are desensitized, and in every movie, almost every movie, every television show, the aliens are always here for resources. It's always some type of military mission. It's always some type of depopulation, genocidal holocaust. And that's what these beings always seem to be waging. Or it's about taking organ samples and extracting DNA from cattle and humans during abduction processes and implanting microchips and all of this stuff that seems so dark. And I think on many levels it actually takes place. But what we are forgetting is that we are grouping probably an innumerable amount of different beings, both highly intelligent, mildly intelligent, and less intelligent, as I think we could probably fit into that bottom category. Just not too many steps above single-cell bacteria, to be honest. I think we have to be honest with ourselves, rather. In the grand scheme of things, I think we are just one step above that. I think intelligences exist out there on the level that we can't even begin to imagine. We can't even begin to fathom the possibilities, and therefore we write them off because we are scared, because we are fearful of the unknown. Nothing else could exist, and even if they did, why would they come here? What makes us so special? Therefore, we are the only life that exists in all of creation. And my answer to that is perhaps we're not necessarily that special. Or perhaps if we are very special, either one of those explanations could be a very, very probable explanation for why an intelligent species might want to come here to observe something that perhaps they've never experienced or seen before, some type of scientific endeavor rather than some type of warlike species, some type of locust feeding planet to planet to planet, although I'm sure that those types of beings exist out there as well. Perhaps this planet is a prison planet, an incubator for flora and fauna and different types of animal and human-like species. It's a genetic testing ground, perhaps. Perhaps we are the slave remnants of a once powerful culture. Perhaps we are the slave remnants of a powerful culture that had advanced mining resources that outstretched to the extent of our solar system and several others, thousands and millions within our galaxy alone. Perhaps we can find evidence of these mining operations not just on Earth, which has been documented 300,000 to 400,000 years ago in some coal veins in Africa, or excuse me, gold mines in Africa, not coal, gold mines in Africa, as well as possible mining operations on the moon and on Mars. Now, there are anomalous photographs, if you will, or anomalies in photographs taken by both the Russians and the Americans, and all of those photos that we discussed in the previous show, as well as photos we're discussing on today's show. If you go to thesecretteachings.info on the front home page, where you'll see a promotional link for tonight's show and last night's show, there's a link to download a PDF file, and the name of the file is Never a Straight Answer. If you download that file, you'll have all of the notes that Mike D and I have for this weekend. I spent 10 hours assembling these notes, finding the photographs, whether they are photographs that I'm using to try to prove a point or to try to debunk some type of wild theory that's not promulgated by the mainstream, but that's pushed by some alternative sect as if they know what's really going on. And that's the thing about me, and that's the thing about all of the research I've done on these subjects. I'm not claiming to know what's going on. I am just trying to say, let's take a look at the situation once more. Let's take a look at the arguments we have, the debates we have, the fears we have, and let's try to overcome those fears and those anxieties and those stresses and those worries. And let's try to look at the situation once again. Let's try to be real with ourselves rather than living with some type of arrogance out of the misunderstandings and distortion that most of us have based on a form of ignorance. People will tell you that technology for space travel of these innumerable distances just simply does not exist. It can't exist. It goes against the very fundamental basic laws of physics. And we have to understand that science has been wrong more times in the last 100 years than they've been entirely correct. When we have these laws of physics, these theories that we promote as fact, it prevents us from truly grasping, even through imagination, the possibility of something greater than we've already achieved. The technology doesn't exist because we haven't invented it, because we can't conceive of it. Just because humans can't conceive of it, or just because humans haven't developed it, or we haven't seen the open development of this technology, as I believe some type of advanced technology for space travel probably exists already right here on Earth. We just don't see it. By taking this new understanding that human beings, just because we don't have it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist, doesn't mean that some other intelligent species doesn't have this technology. To be able to traverse wormholes, to go billions of miles within a short period of time, to travel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times the speed of light. Who knows what's truly possible? Perhaps a civilization, thinking of what I talked about last night, if you look at our developments just in the last 100 years, we've achieved spaceflight in 100 years. Imagine what we will achieve in another 100 years as computer technology steadily increases and increases and increases. We cast off old shackles and old paradigms. 100 years. Wonder if a civilization developed. I don't care if they were created by the Creator or some alien beings engineered this species on their planet, perhaps in the same manner that humans were developed. That none of that matters. Let's say that we have an advanced civilization. They're in a solar system very similar to ours, and they developed 100 years prior to humans, which means in terms of our calendar, let's say they're in the year 2115. Do you think that maybe in that extra 100 years they may have achieved something that is unimaginable to us humans, something that we might not even be able to conceive of for another 50 years and might not even be able to develop for another 100? We need to have more of an open mind, and science always kind of has this mindset that if we can't see it, it doesn't exist, or if we can't necessarily touch it, if we can't perceive it through the five senses, it doesn't exist, or if we can't get the facts about this element, this situation, whatever the case may be, then it just probably doesn't exist. It can't exist if we can't explain it through conventional methods. And yet, so many times is that theoretical concept proven wrong, and yet those theories are pushed as facts when they are nothing but opinions promoted as a theory, promoted as a fact. But when you strip that fact down, you get theory, and when you strip that theory down, you get an opinion, and when you strip that opinion down, you get a human being, a very vulnerable, a very, in some ways, weak animal that has many flaws, and we make mistakes. Therefore, our theories will be flawed as well. The arguments that we always have against extraterrestrials or aliens coming to Earth, I've just went through them with you. Why come here? The technology doesn't exist, and they die before they got here, right? There's no way that they could live that long because humans only lived about, 60, 70, maybe 80 if we're pushing it, unless you drink blood, and then you're like the royals and you live to 102, 110, something like that. Maybe these beings live 1,000 years. Maybe 100 years to them is a decade to us. These are questions that I can't sit here and answer for you. I can't tell you that I have the answer, so go buy my book. I have the answer, so listen to the show every week. I have the answer, so send us money. That's not what this is about. This is a revolutionary new type of radio show where I am bringing to you information that I have gained from personal study and research, personal meditation and philosophical thought. Ideas, concepts, and views that I can share with you, giving you tools so that we may advance this open-minded approach to viewing perhaps other life in the universe or some form of advanced technology, breaking free and eliminating the arrogance that comes out of distorted ignorance. We hear that humans, the only species in the universe, and that paradigm is slowly being broken apart. And then I hear things like aliens would have to travel so far to get here. Now, we've already kind of been through that technological discussion. I mentioned it just a moment ago, and of course last night. But that is also based on the ignorant assumption that human-like beings of some sort don't exist here in our own solar system. And perhaps these beings that exist in our own solar system are the beings that man was created in the image of these gods. Not that they are true gods, but they are perceived as gods through the primitive cultures of mankind. Perhaps these beings created us as a slave race to mine for materials. And perhaps, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we see the evidence of these mining operations both on Earth, both on Mars, and on Earth's moon, and through other planets and moons within our solar system alone. Imagine the anomalies that we might photograph if we were able to reach the closest star and photograph the planets and moons that orbit it. Imagine the questions that might be brought to the table that demand answers. And we are told that we will not be allowed to know about the presence of extraterrestrials. The 1960s Brookings Institute study was adopted by NASA, claiming that sweeping changes or the downfall of civilization might be had if contact with an alien race was to be revealed to the public, that other societies have disintegrated when confronted by a superior society. Perhaps the concealment of extraterrestrials is conducted not by our government or some shadowy operation, but perhaps by the beings themselves, by however many groups there are. Because maybe they are not allowed to interfere with the developing species until we have reached a point where we won't break down our society with this information. Now, I don't fully agree with that. I think that a lot of us could handle it. More and more and more could handle this. And that's because of the slow desensitization, because of television and movies and books and video games and magazines and comics. Documentaries about the idea of alien life. And perhaps we won't destroy our society, but perhaps there are many out there, because we have not reached a critical mass, who would revolt religiously, politically, and just strictly financially, socially motivated to riot and loot because they have an opportunity to. Humans on a very, very low vibrational form of consciousness and existence. But perhaps there are shadowy entities that have made deals with certain groups of beings in the face of the beings that want to help us but do not interfere because of some type of universal law or some moral code that they have. There are so many possibilities, ladies and gentlemen, that I think this discussion ought to be had, because this is, I think, in the next 100 to 200 years going to be a new form of political discussion. Eventually, regardless of your beliefs in God and religious institutions, regardless of your political affiliations, regardless of what you like to do on the weekend, sitting down and eating ice cream and watching TV or eating fast food, eventually humanity will have to come to terms with the fact that they are not alone in the universe, that they are not alone in the galaxy, and that likely we are not alone in our own solar system. And perhaps what scares us the most is that if an advanced species did exist, perhaps even engineered us, and yet they have disappeared, are we scared that if they're so far advanced, how would we not succumb to the same fate, perhaps a worse fate than they did? Perhaps they simply left and just left us like we leave equipment at a construction site and thought nothing more of it. These are ideas that I think deserve to be discussed. Last night on The Secret Teachings, we also talked about the Space Act of 1958, which allowed for NASA to collect as much information as they possibly could about space, but this information was supposed to be given to the public, unless, of course, it was a matter of national security. So perhaps that gets in the way of our understanding and knowledge of extraterrestrials. And let me get this off of my chest. Let me get this very, very straight. Let me beat it down and put a balance on this so that we can make sure that it's smooth and balanced and straight. And that is, when we say something like extraterrestrial, alien, UFOs, I think about 95% of sightings can be written off literally as some type of other phenomenon, be it not even a phenomenon, but perhaps a commercial airliner, perhaps a military craft. A huge portion of sightings are governmental programs. I promise you that. They are, whether they're black operations or not, I'm not always sure, but I'm sure that those take place too, especially out in Nevada, New Mexico, in the desert, places like that. There are other sightings, however, which even to the official Blue Book program could not be explained. Now, perhaps Blue Book and the men who made this investigative group up allowed these to be unexplained in order to say that, look, we just can't explain these, so maybe there's some validity to it, kind of giving the public this nudge that there's something more to the UFO phenomenon than meets the eye. Perhaps it's not something that we can just write off. Perhaps that's in itself some form of disinformation. We have to be very careful. Disinformation is running rampant. Regardless of your opinions or beliefs on supposed unclassified, declassified, ultra-top secret documents that you might be able to find on the internet. Yeah, they might be fun to talk about. Some of them might be real, whether they're the MJ-12 papers or the Majestic 12, what was it called? The Majestic 12, was it the crash assessment, being able to go in. They had like this list of things that you had to do if you found a crashed UFO. You go find these EBEs, these extraterrestrial biological entities, and who you have to report to. Whether documents like that are real or not, who knows? It could be a very, very skilled form of disinformation. But regardless of that disinformation, we are quite often led astray from the truth when it's right in front of our faces. And last night we talked about the missions to Mars, how since 2000, 16 of 23 probes that we've sent to Mars have failed. Since 2005, more than 40 international missions to Mars have been conducted, and over half of those have crashed, exploded, or were lost. Perhaps something specifically with Mars and our fascination with Mars has caused interference with our scientific observations. I find it strange that we shot a missile at the moon. Does anybody else find that odd? Or at least somewhat interesting, something that you should take a second look at and say, why did that happen? It wasn't to find water. They already announced that they had found water on the moon. They didn't need to launch a rocket at it. I think something else might be going on, ladies and gentlemen. And some of these photographs that I've compiled and I put in this PDF file that you can download for free at thesecretteachings.info. As we talked about last night, the rods that were photographed, these large, might call them craft, photographed by Phobos 2 in 1989 by the Soviets. Another one very similar, photographed, this was on the surface of Mars by the Curiosity rover in 2014. There are rods that were photographed by the HalioViewer and SOHO near the Sun. And these are very, very similar to other images that have been taken of Saturn. Of course, there was a book written about this. I think it was called The Ringmakers of Saturn. And if you go into the PDF that I put up on the website, Never a Straight Answer is the name of the PDF. You can download it for free. The website, www.thesecretteachings.info. And once this first hour is over, when I'm done going through these Saturn photographs, I will have Mike D on. We will get into the hollow moon, as well as some other information about the moon and extraterrestrials, as well as the concept of UFOs. And as of right now, I'm not sure if Mike D has put together any information on Venus, as he mentioned last night, but we will find out here within about 40 minutes when we have Mike on. Now, these Saturn rods, if you scroll down in the PDF file, you'll see two pictures. And I highly recommend that you download this file because it's free and there's a lot of work in here. All the photographs are linked to nasa.gov and or JPL official sites. These are official photos. I went the official route so that people can't say, oh, you just photoshopped it, you made it up. Nope, I took it right from NASA's own website. This photograph that I have, there are actually two of them. They were taken by Cassini. Images of the F ring of Saturn, August 7th, 2009. And you might have to zoom in, but it's very clear, even zoomed out, that there is a large cylindrical object that is blasting through the F ring of Saturn. The top photograph is a little bit harder to see. The bottom photograph, since it's a little bit more blown up, is very clear that something is traversing the ring of Saturn directly in a straight line, point A to B, and it is in the shape of the same type of rod. We might call it a cigar-shaped UFO. We might call it some type of extraterrestrial vehicle, but it is very clear that this object, and maybe I'm just reaching, ladies and gentlemen, looks almost identical to the one photographed by Phobos 2 near the moons of Mars in 1989. It looks identical to the one Curiosity took a picture of on the surface of Mars in 2014, and it looks identical to the ones that are so massive that we're seen orbiting the sun by the HalioViewer and by SOHO. So if you look at those two photos, the F ring of Saturn, this object is a large cylindrical cigar-shaped object shooting right through the ring of Saturn. Hard to miss. If you scroll down, the next photograph is from jpl.nasa.gov. The link is right there in the PDF. In fact, I think if you click it, it will take you directly to the website, even from the PDF. And this is from August 19th, 2008. So this was actually about a year before the previous photos were taken. It's also taken by Cassini, and the number of the photo is N00118731. That's N00118731. It's a close-up. I had the The original image doesn't look exactly like this. It's a larger photograph, but I zoomed in and took a picture of this, and this image here is a visual of the 2 rings of Saturn, outer rings, and in the center of these rings you can clearly see, and Saturn is massive, massive as a dwarf star, and you see in the middle of these 2 rings is another large cylindrical type object. Now, if you scroll down a little bit further, this one I'm somewhat skeptical of, but I loaded it into the PDF just in case anyway. This is from Cassini. It's from jpl.nasa.gov once again, and the Cassini photograph number is PIA 11654. That's PIA 11654, taken in 2009. And I did not zoom in on this one, but if you do zoom in, it's just about in the direct center of the page. You see the 2 outer rings of Saturn, and it's very, very telling because if you look at the previous image of the 2 outer rings of Saturn and you see this rod cylindrical object, which is probably half the size of planet Earth. I mean, who knows? These things are massive. That is, whether it's orbiting or purposely flying throughout the ring of Saturn there, you can see how large this object is. But if you go down and you look at the next picture from Cassini, and you see that this object is shooting straight through the ring from that same location the previous object was, it might be the exact same one. This one might even be a larger cylindrical, cigar-shaped, unidentified flying object. It is massive. It is incredibly large, beyond all comprehension. To build something of this size would take more than all the resources on Earth times 1,000. This is why we can't comprehend the size of some of these, what we might call vehicles. If you scroll down, you'll see another image from Cassini. It's an image of Saturn, and you will see this image is number W00003034. That's W00003034. It's also from JPL and NASA. So if you click the link, that'll take you right to the website. And this image is very, very interesting. If you look at, and just so you know, you might have seen this image elsewhere, but this is the original upright version of the image. Some people turn this image sideways so it makes it easier to see. But if you look down, and let me click out of this here because I accidentally highlighted it. If you look down in about in the center of the page and a little bit below the center, about a quarter of the way up, you'll see this large cylindrical object. And off of that large cylindrical object, you'll see as if it almost looks like something is being sprayed out of the object, or if this is simply some type of material coming off of the object as it is moving through the ring of Saturn. Perhaps it is just ice and dust from the ring of Saturn. But that is a fascinating, fascinating image. And then one of the most telling, I think, is the next one. It's an infrared image. It's taken by the Hubble Space Telescope. The image is PIA 01271. That's PIA 01271. It's a photograph of Saturn and a couple of the moons of Saturn. And if you look at this, there are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. There are 10 infrared images here. And the one that I'm looking at, 2 of them specifically, but one of them more so than the other, is the bottom left infrared image. And go down to the very bottom left and look up one above the bottom left. So it's the 4th down from the top on the left column. You will see this tiny, tiny mark, which it's not too tiny because it's roughly, a fraction of the size of Saturn. It looks like those images you see of the Earth compared to Saturn, and that's how big the Earth is. That's what this image looks like, I think. You can see one of the moons in the bottom right corner of that photograph, and this object is literally the width of the moon. I mean, that is just a massive object. And here is another example of these large cylindrical cigar-type UFOs. Now, I added this next photo in here. This is from Apollo 16. The name of the photo is AS16120-19238. That's AS16120-19238. This is also from JPL. Now, this was used in Fred Steckling's book, We Discovered Alien Bases on the Moon. Now, personally, I don't think that this is some type of cylindrical object. I think that this is maybe the image of something that's attached to the lunar module. Now, there's two ways to look at that. One, the image that was used in Fred Steckling's book could be the original image, and it did look much more convincing that some cylindrical object was passing through the frame. This image that I have here is, I don't know if it's that or NASA perhaps did some type of manipulation to the photograph, because it took a long time to find this photo. It took me about 10 hours for putting all of this together, like I said, and a lot of them were moved around, they were reversed, they were flipped over, mirrored on themselves, they were airbrushed out, put in the wrong location, wrong heading, which, like Mike said last night, NASA can't show us colored photographs. NASA can't hire somebody to organize these photos better, and then on top of that, they lose the moon tapes. They show up at a McDonald's and they turn up to be erased, and then now they just can't show them to us anymore. You'd think that an agency that is run by the military would have a little bit better organization. Just a thought. So I don't really think that this Apollo 16 image is much to scoff at, although there is maybe a little bit of evidence that there is maybe some photo manipulation, which means that this photo is not the original, that they altered the original photo, and that it is much, much different than the one that we originally saw, or if you read Fred Steckling's book, We Discovered Alien Bases on the Moon, the one that you saw in there. Now, I'm going to save the rest of these photos. There's some lunar observer photographs in here. One of them is from Fred Steckling's book, and then another one is from the LO5. There are some images of the moon in color from Apollo 8, where the moon has a different colored surface. And those are things that we will get to here in the next 2 hours when we have Mike D on. There is another topic that I wanted to discuss with you tonight before I have Mike on, and depending, of course, on how long this topic takes and how long Mike D and I talk about these images of the moon, and the hollow moon is going to be the other topic, as well as these sailing stones. I wanted to perhaps do a third show on this, because I think there's so much information that there's not enough time to talk about it. And in fact, as I'm scrolling through the PDF now, I don't see how we're going to have enough time. We'll probably plan on doing a third show on this coming up next Saturday. And don't forget, if you're not caught up on the Secret Teachings yet, go to thesecretteachings.info. Go to the show archive at the top of the page, and you can download all of our past episodes for free. If you're just joining us, I am your host, Ryan Gable. The website is www.thesecretteachings.info. Now, I know I've kind of spoken somewhat fast tonight. I might be speaking a little bit too fast for some people, but this is honestly about as slow as I can talk, especially when there's so much to get out. If I didn't speak at least somewhat this speed, we'd be doing 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 shows in a row on this subject. That's how much information there is to discuss, at least the concepts of which we see in some of these photographs. So, talked about the rods of Saturn, very, very similar to the rods photographed near the moon, the rod photographed near the sun, and the 1989 photo taken by Phobos 2 by the Russians, and the photo taken by Curiosity on the surface of Mars, these rod images, as well as the one taken by SOHO and the Helio viewer near these rods near the sun. Something, ladies and gentlemen, is to account for these anomalies. Perhaps there is some type of very basic scientific explanation. Perhaps there is not. Either way, though, these are questions I think that need to be addressed rather than written off as some type of paranoia. The true paranoia is believing that if this information is revealed, the public will panic. The public will go insane. We will riot. We will loot. I'm sure in some places that will take place, but it's not much different than the fear and panic that's created during a mass shooting, or because a white cop shot a black kid, we have riots and looting because of that. I mean, people are going to do that regardless. We are a very primitive culture, I think. At least that's my thought in overview, in general. However, there are some of us who are much more enlightened, much more spiritually evolved, and we have the ability to comprehend let's say, some of these photographs that if you just put the pieces together, it becomes very clear that something is not right, that you have been deceived in some way, shape, or form, and that there are other beings that exist in our, not the solar system, not the galaxy, but our, not in the universe of the galaxy, but in our solar system. Got all tongue-tied there. There are beings that exist already in our solar system. They don't have to travel billions of light years. They're already here, ladies and gentlemen. Perhaps they even have bases on the Earth. We know that humans have been building massive underground facilities, deep underground military bases. This is something that's been going on since at least the 40s and 50s. We have patents for some of these devices owned by the Air Force, and they've only advanced technologically. I've heard a couple of things, and I'm sure you have too, depending on how many radio shows like this you've listened to. You hear that maybe aliens have built bases on Earth and underground caverns similar to the ones I propose that are constructed on our moon and on Mars. We've heard different stories that, maybe these craft are not necessarily physical craft. They're not made out of natural resources in the traditional sense, but instead some type of spiritual craft. So they are able to be constructed in a way where they are larger than a planet. Perhaps that's how we perceive them because we are so tiny. I mean, it's like going out to an ant pile, that old adage. Look at the ant pile. Look at all the ants running around. That's maybe what humans look like. And they think they have some type of advanced technology, perhaps. And yet, it's very primitive because we're humans and we've developed rocket ships and medical technology and we can extend your life and we have medication and the scalpel and the needle. We're so much more advanced. And that advanced civilization that has 100 years on us comes along and they look at us and they say, you guys are so primitive. You haven't developed a way to traverse wormholes yet? And perhaps you get to that technological advancement and some type of spiritual enlightenment comes along with it. Hopefully that is what happens to us earthlings. Now, in the second and third hour, as I mentioned, Mike D will be joining us. We will be talking about the hollow moon. To get us started with that, we will be going through a couple of additional images that are in the PDF, Never a Straight Answer. That's the name of it. You can download it for free at thesecretteachings.info. On the website, you will also find our archive to download our past episodes as well as tonight's episode and last night's episode. But I wanted to bring something to your attention that I've done a show on before, and this might have something to do, who knows, with these sailing stones, as they're called. Something else I did a show on last year, and we will talk about that when Mike D jumps on in about 30 minutes. Now, when we look at the moon, this idea of the hollow moon, we'll talk about the seismographs that were put there and these noises that are heard when the moon reaches the closest proximity to the Earth in its orbit. And what's recorded is a type of creaking sound. I'm not sure if you've ever heard this sound or somebody who claims they have the sound from these seismographic recorders or the recorders that are set up here on Earth. I'm not even sure what they use to record this. This is just, according to different scientists both in Russia and in the U.S., that the Earth makes this creaking noise, kind of like the hull of a ship. Now, you might have heard also, other authors like David Icke talk about this idea as well. But I wanted to take it a step further. For you, and it might get a little bit crazy, but I've got some proof to back up what I'm saying. In the past couple of decades, and increasingly more so in the past, 5 or 6 years, people have reported all over the world, from British Columbia to the Ukraine to Australia to Britain, this loud noise that they claim comes from the sky. Pretty interesting. What is this loud noise? Well, it's been heard throughout the United States. I had a friend of mine in Florida who lived near near Christmas, Florida, which is very close to Titusville, where NASA unofficially still operates. And she called me up one night and said that she heard this loud banging sound under the ground. Now, these banging sounds under the ground might be a little bit different than the noises that people claim they hear from the sky, but I wanted you to take a listen to some of these sounds. This is like a 3-minute clip. I'll play a minute or two of it, and I want you to keep this in mind. We have this idea that the moon is hollow. This is something that's been talked about by NASA, although it's not something that's promoted as a fact that we should know, so it's probably not something that is a form of disinformation. But when you think of this and you think of the sounds that are supposedly heard when the moon gets close to the Earth and that gravitational pull pulls and morphs and pushes and pulls on the moon, and you hear a creaking sound, which would back up the theory that the moon is hollow. NASA has vibrations from the seismographs that show that vibrations going through the moon don't reverberate and come back. They go through the other side, meaning that there is no core. And we even see evidence on the surface of the moon that the heavier material that should be on the inside because of concepts of gravity and relativity is not on the inside, but rather on the outside. So it actually goes thicker, harder, medium, and then softer towards the center, which is not natural. That is artificial in nature, just like the moons of Mars may also be constructed in this way. Perhaps they are ancient satellites to monitor the beings here on Earth, and there are cultures who have talked about this idea of beings that stayed in a type of orbit. The Igigi stayed in orbit above the Earth, and if you look at some of these sculptures the Sumerians made of these Igigi, they look almost identical to modern-day satellites. Very, very interesting. There are also stories that the moon was towed in to our solar system. This brought about great cataclysm, perhaps killing the giants who lived here, and this moon was stationed precisely in a perfect spot to create the solar eclipse that we see, a perfect spot where there is no rotation. There's always one side of the moon facing away from us, perhaps a great place for an extraterrestrial base. But this is all speculation. What I want you to listen to, ladies and gentlemen, is something pretty fascinating. What this is audio taken from across the globe. This first one is in British Columbia. But tell me what you think. I promote the idea, my theory, that these loud sounds, and yes, some of them might be underground bases being constructed. However, I don't think the underground bases being constructed, whether the initial explosions in construction and or the release of noxious fumes into the atmosphere through these large pipes that blow out toxic, poisonous gas so the workers don't die, that could account for some of this. But this, to me, sounds like a creaking sound, and I'm going to make a connection saying that the sound that these people are hearing that's in this video here, ladies and gentlemen, is very, very similar to the sound that is heard when the moon gets close to the Earth. And therefore, I promote the theory that the Earth perhaps is also a hollowed-out planetary sphere, artificial in nature. Maybe I'm crazy, but let's take a listen to these sounds that are being heard all over the globe. This is not from YouTube. This is from the mainstream media. This one comes from the Daily Mail in London, which to people in Britain, they don't really like the Daily Mail. I don't like Fox News. I don't like the Daily Mail. I don't like any of these mainstream news sites, but nevertheless it is mainstream, and here is the sound. They say nobody has an explanation for it. I think I have a pretty good explanation for it. Here we go. It sounds like the hull of a ship creaking. That sound there was recorded in Austria in 2012. And what I find incredible is that science has not even a clue. They don't even, promote the idea that they think they know what's going on. What I think, ladies and gentlemen, is that if this isn't some type of construction that's being done underground, because this is heard kind of in the atmosphere up above us, maybe,
you guys hear that?
just maybe, this is evidence of a hollowed-out earthly sphere. Perhaps this is evidence that the Earth's crust is beginning to move and become displaced. This sound was taken in the Ukraine here. This is from Belarus. And this one is from Germany.
Was ist das? Ich habe keine Ahnung, der Junge da unten guckt auch.
And this was this year, April 2015. All right, that there is from British Columbia, but let's go ahead and stop that audio sound. It's kind of creepy, I think. And what you tend to have is that you have a bunch of Christians that run around and say, this is the end times, it's the trumpets that signify Armageddon. I don't really think so. What I think, and who knows, maybe it is, maybe I'm wrong. If this is not the construction of underground military bases or underground fallout shelters or whatever's being constructed, perhaps the physical integrity of the earth has been compromised in some way, shape, or form. Perhaps the earth's crust is beginning to be displaced through natural means. Perhaps these aliens that the government made a deal with, if that's true, have tricked us, and we thought that they were going to build underground bases and maybe experiment on a couple of humans, when in fact they've done something to the core of our planet to make it implode. Perhaps the Earth, and this is the more plausible theory, I believe, because it relates directly to Earth's moon as being a hollowed-out planetary sphere. Perhaps the Earth's moon is hollow. Perhaps the Earth is hollow. And perhaps it is an artificial construct. And let me propose, ladies and gentlemen, that if some of these images taken in the 1980s by Phobos, the final image of Phobos 2, is of an object that is the size larger than the size of a moon, of a satellite, perhaps artificial. Some of these objects, the same one taken by Curiosity, the same ones taken by Cassini, the Helio viewer in Soho on the Sun, the rings of Saturn. These objects are taken throughout our entire solar system. Then we examine the size of these objects that are so massive. They are the size of a planet. If it is true that whatever pilots these things is some type of intelligent species, they have technology, they have intellect beyond our wildest imagination. And if they have the technology, ladies and gentlemen, to construct an object, to construct some type of ship that is the size of a planet, then what makes you think they didn't construct our moon, which evidence shows is artificial in nature? What makes you think, after hearing those eerie, creepy sounds, those creaking sounds that sound like the creaking of the hull of a large cargo ship, the same sounds heard when the moon comes into close proximity with the Earth? Perhaps the Earth is also hollowed out and an artificial construct. I'm not 100% sure I can prove any of these ideas, but I can tell you that science cannot disprove them, and science will try to tell you that they know what the problem is, they know what these sounds are, they know what's going on, but the thing is, science is wrong quite often, and unless we can begin to acknowledge what else exists out there in the universe, that we can fully comprehend the grand scheme of our existence as a species, and instead we live in some type of fanciful delusion, believing that we are everything and that the sun revolves around us and that God created us and that he doesn't want homosexuals to marry. There's so much more out there. We're caught up on things like this. There are objects, there are ships the size of planets, and I'm crazy for putting the pieces together using official photographs, and I'm somehow crazy for suggesting that the Earth might be a hollowed out planetary artificial construct in the same way that our moon is an artificial construct, the moons of Mars, artificial constructs. And perhaps I'm crazy for suggesting that if a species intelligent beyond our wildest imagination could create ships that are the size of a planet, that they couldn't create a planet themselves. And all of this could be a grand illusion. I'm Ryan Gable. This is The Secret Teaching. Stay tuned. We'll be back in just a little bit with Mike D. The physical world we see with our brains is truly an illusion, an energetic expression of consciousness. We see less than 1% of what exists within white visible light, yet profess to understand the nature of existence. A physical matter made of hollow particles perceived as physical only by our DNA, brain, and five-sense decoding system, decoding a series of biological zeros and ones in the forms of A, C, T, and G. Occultists call this the Grand Illusion, and this is the name of my first book, The Grand Illusion: Slaves to Perception. My name is Ryan Gable, and I'm the author of The Grand Illusion and host of the radio show The Secret Teachings. It is my perspective that we are all slaves to perception, programmed to react rather than to think critically, programmed to consume, to mock those who are different than you, and to outcast others that are different than the acceptable social norms. In the book The Grand Illusion, I have broken down what we call reality into 3 parts. In part 1, I explore the big questions of who we are, where did we come from, and of course religious teachings rooted in astronomy, commonly known as astrotheology. In the second part of The Grand Illusion, I explore the history of central banks and world wars, international networks of child abusers, geoengineering of our environment, secret societies, UFOs, and the paranormal. In the third part of The Grand Illusion, I explore political assassinations, symbols, and sacred geometry, and how, with the evidence I've provided, my belief is that events like 9/11 2001 and the 2012 London Olympics were mass energy rituals. The book is over 700 pages and filled with years of my own research, which I believe is separated from others in this field by the way that I approach such topics, such as UFOs, how some will just simply either believe or automatically disbelieve, choosing a predetermined, pre-conclusive side in that argument, when in fact I believe that the alien myth is some type of cover for something else, and we'd explore that in The Grand Illusion. How secret societies are not a group of men, sometimes women, worshiping the devil, that in fact they are remnants of ancient mystery schools. And of course, my rare coverage of Gaza and the international network of pedophiles. But regardless of your opinions or beliefs, The Grand Illusion has something for everyone, including an entire chapter on health, my own personal experiences and how to eat non-GMO, information on hidden ingredients and deceptive labels from companies, as well as the ingredients and ways to opt out of vaccinations legally. Now, I could tell you that my book, The Grand Illusion: Slaves to Perception, will change the world or help you to survive the end times or get you closer to God. But that's exactly the type of deceptive mentality that I attempt to expose in the book, living without fear and instead being informed. If you would like a copy of The Grand Illusion: Slaves to Perception, you can purchase the copy at thesecretteachings.info. That's thesecretteachings.info. Click on the shop tab and you have your choice of softcover or PDF. There is no regulation or editing of what I wrote in this 700-page book. And if you'd like a free sample, you can email me at rdgable@yahoo.com. That's over 700 pages, 3 parts, and 13 chapters. Visit thesecretteachings.info and click on the Shop tab today to order your copy of The Grand Illusion, Slaves to Perception. The book will also be available from Barnes & Noble and Amazon. Don't be afraid, be informed.
People who question the official version of events are usually labeled with the term conspiracy theorist, since this term is associated with paranoia and insanity. The person's questions are immediately dismissed as the rantings of someone who has gone mad, and using the ad hominem argument by immediately attacking the person rather than addressing their question, no matter how seemingly insane it may at first sound, a preconceived, often repeated storyline is allowed to exist and masquerade as absolute truth. If you train the masses to laugh at what they don't understand and to dismiss it as nonsense, then you have essentially eliminated free thought and critical thinking with little to no physical force. By setting the standards for what is possible or not, by what is apparently right or wrong, you are able to engineer an entire group of people and thus influence their choices and lifestyles to fit the corporate, political, socio-economic agenda of the real men behind the curtain. This has been an alternative fact brought to you by The Secret Teachings.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
Perhaps we need some outside universal threat. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war?
What can be more alien than this?
Was that Ronald Reagan, Nick?
That was a very old Ronald Reagan.
To back engineer captured extraterrestrial technology for adaptation into the United States space program.
How can we so arrogantly believe that we are at the very cutting edge of human and social evolution? How can we truly understand ourselves when we dilute our very nature with distractions that only seem to entertain rather than educate the human brain and mind? If you wish to explore these concepts and much more, you can tune into The Secret Teachings, Sundays at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the L&M Radio Network. You can also download and listen to past episodes for free by visiting our website, www.thesecretteachings.info. Remember that the highest wisdom is silent fact, and that wisdom is not bestowed, it is achieved.
I have lived with a fragile faith built on the ether of vague memories from an experience that I could neither prove nor explain. When I was 12, my sister was taken from me, taken from our home by a force that I came to believe was extraterrestrial. This belief sustained me, fueling a quest for truths that were as elusive as the memory itself.
Welcome back to The Secret Teachings. I am your host, Ryan Gable. The website, www.thesecretteachings.info. That is www.thesecretteachings.info. If you head on over to the website and you'd like to follow along with tonight's episode of The Secret Teachings, you can download the free PDF entitled Never a Straight Answer. It's on the homepage of the website. Download that. It will give you 30-plus pages of photographs and links to what we have been discussing on the show tonight, as well as what we discussed last night on The Secret Teachings. And as part of this two-part back-to-back special edition of the show, we will actually have a third part to this ongoing series on topics such as cylinder, cigar-shaped UFOs, anomalies in official NASA and Russian photographs from space, from the moons of Mars to the surface of Mars to Earth's moon to the rings of Saturn. All of these planetary bodies, there have been observed these long, cylindrical, cigar-shaped UFOs, unidentified flying objects, or perhaps unidentified aerial vehicles or unidentified aerial objects, whatever type of name that you choose to give to it is really irrelevant, and we shouldn't have to argue and debate whether or not these things exist because we see them in the photographs. They are there. It's a matter of then deciphering what information we have available to be able to tell us what this anomaly really is. It's an anomaly. It shouldn't be there, but that's basing this on the assumption that we are alone, not only in our own solar system, but in the galaxy and in the universe as a whole. And I think we've pretty much beaten this horse to death, that not only are we not the only beings in the universe, I think that we are very, very much related in our social neighborhood, this solar neighborhood of our own solar system, that there are beings right here that are amongst us right now. And I think that we really kind of got this view or this idea of extraterrestrials coming to Earth really, really hardcore in the 1940s. And I think part of that had to do with the detonating of atomic weapons. There were also programs back in, I think it was like the late 1940s, where the Army had a program where they were shooting these projectiles at the moon and Mars, trying to use the information that they obtained from this to determine the composition of these planets, or some type of excuse like that. They were going to launch missiles at different planets using V2 rockets in the 1940s. And what was really interesting about this program through the Army Ordnance is that this program is very, very similar to the same type of excuse that NASA used a couple of years ago when they shot a rocket at the moon claiming they were looking for water, even though they had already discovered water. Now, perhaps it was an assortment and a combination of programs such as this Army Ordnance program to launch V2 rockets at the moon and Mars specifically, two bodies that the moon is perhaps hollow and the moons of Mars are perhaps hollow, two bodies where there is an assortment. There are dozens of photographs and lots of evidence and information, even through remote viewing, that there are beings that had in the past or perhaps still exist there today, that there's a lot of activity around these planetary bodies. And perhaps it was that plus the detonating of nuclear weapons in the 40s that led to an increase in UFO activity. And also, in order to cover this up, perhaps certain intelligence agencies, the CIA, the NSA, government black operations, a government within a government, used this new information, used these vehicle anomalies in the sky, these unidentified aerial craft, these UFOs, what people might term flying saucers. They use this in order to distract people's attention away and getting people to believe that these really are all extraterrestrial craft in order to develop secret spy planes throughout the 50s and 60s. And a lot of sightings nowadays are based upon people's misunderstandings of aerial phenomenon. Most of the sightings we have today are people wanting to believe that what they're seeing is extraterrestrial. I think we can write off 80% to simply that preconceived notion. Another percentage of that can be written off to actual military craft. People will say, well, if these beings are coming from so far away with all of this incredible technology, then don't you think that they have a little bit easier of a time navigating through our planet and not crashing all the time? Well, one, we know that maybe they didn't come from that far away. Perhaps they could already be here in our own solar system. But two, maybe it's not that they're having trouble navigating through our planet's atmosphere. Perhaps they're being shot down by the military through some type of advanced weaponry. Perhaps it's a silent war that's taking place. Or perhaps, just like our vehicles, they just break down once in a while, and maybe they succumb to some type of pollution on Earth, some type of interference on Earth that they don't experience on other worlds, on other planets, and other parts of the solar system, galaxy, and the universe, and therefore these craft do crash. I think that Roswell, for example, one of the biggest well-known ones, is just a big cover for something else. And I actually detailed that in my first book, The Grand Illusion, that Roswell was essentially a cover for other crashed, unidentified flying objects, and there have been many of them over the years that don't get the kind of publicity that the one in 1947 got. Now, with that being said, I wanted to shift our attention, because Mike D will be joining us here in just a few minutes. I wanted to shift our attention specifically to the moon, and when Mike D joins us, we are going to talk about the moon. We are going to talk about the colored photographs from Apollo, and we're going to talk about moon anomalies. You know, before the break, I played that clip for you of this strange, eerie sound being heard all over the world, from Belgium, Austria, Germany, British Columbia, all over the world. This weird, creepy kind of creaking sound is being heard. And when I first heard about the hollow moon, you know, I was very intrigued, and there was something inside of me that just said, yes, part of this has to be true in some way. There was just something that was pulling me towards this information. And as I did research on it, you know, authors like David Icke, Jim Marrs, they wrote about it in their books, Human Race, Get Off Your Knees, and then Jim Marrs' Alien Agenda. They both wrote about anomalies on the moon and the idea of the hollow moon, and they both cited these two Russian scientists who wrote an article for Sputnik many years ago, the Soviet magazine, and we were going to talk about that tonight, actually. They proposed this idea that the moon is a type of hollowed-out artificial spacecraft. Now, in taking that into consideration, and taking into consideration the seismographs that NASA put on the moon to monitor seismic activity, and you know, some of these, I guess, earthquakes or moonquakes, as they call them, were attributed to falling booster rockets from some of the Apollo missions, but some of them were not attributed to that. And I think NASA has really kind of put the muzzle, if you will, on this information so that it doesn't get out that the moon is a very active body today. Perhaps we even seen in one of the Apollo videos of one of the flyovers, there's like this gush of either mist or air that comes out of some type of spigot, if you will, on the surface of the moon. This has been recorded on sensors that NASA set up on the surface of the moon, that there's a water vapor that gets kind of brushed across the surface of the sphere. It's very, very fascinating, very interesting. What we do know is that the moon is not what we're told it is. And when you see the color photographs of the moon, when you see some of the anomalous photographs like those that I have in this PDF here that you can download on the website, you will begin to see that the world that we live in, or that the world we perceive to live in, perceptually here on Earth is not what it seems, but nothing out there in the visible solar system is as it seems either. We really are kind of still primitive when it comes to getting a better understanding of what all of this is really all about, what's really going on, who we are, what's taking place on these planetary bodies that are near us. Life, I think, exists in so many forms, and we're so blind to that idea, and we're so arrogant to believe, arrogance out of ignorance, to believe that if these beings do exist, if extraterrestrials exist in any format, in any form, any way, shape, it doesn't matter. It has to be so far away they could never get here. But just because we don't have that technology doesn't mean they couldn't develop it. Whatever these beings are, vastly more intelligent than us, but perhaps they are also here in our own solar system. Perhaps they are using slaves, as us here on Earth perhaps were developed as slaves, genetically engineered, to mine for materials. And we see evidence of this on Earth, as I mentioned in the last hour. We see evidence of this on Mars, and we see evidence of this on the moon. And the evidence of this on the moon are photographs taken by the Lunar Observer number 5. And if you've been to the website and downloaded the PDF file to kind of follow along with tonight's show, you'll see some photographs under the heading Moon Sailing Stones. I just typed up a quick heading there. And the reason I call them sailing stones is because here on Earth we have a phenomenon strictly in Racetrack Playa of Death Valley National Park, where these rocks, and there's images in the PDF of this as well. If you don't have the PDF, if you don't want to download it for whatever reason, just go to the internet, typical search engine, type in sailing stones, S-A-I-L-I-N-G, sailing stones, and you can see these rocks that essentially move across the desert in perfect lines, and some of them, in some cases, a mile in a perfect straight line. Some of them move in opposite directions. And about a year ago, Michael Vera and I here on the L&M Network, we discussed this idea, and we talked about the moon, and that episode was pulled so many times from the archive, specifically for one reason in particular, but perhaps other reasons as well. Some type of energetic source perhaps trying to prevent this information from getting out there because it is very, very important. And my theory, which I've heard nobody else mention so far, is that these sailing stones on Earth, the morning, I swear, to whoever, whatever divine being you want to swear to, Buddha, Allah, Krishna, Jesus, doesn't matter, I swear to this divine being that the next morning after we did that show, there's a news article from Yahoo and Live Science talking about how this mystery of the moving rocks, it's incredible. Some of these rocks are pretty big, moving across the desert, and you can see a trail behind them. And they say, scientists do, that were researching the movement of these rocks, that it was because of atmospheric conditions that these rocks moved across the desert floor. They said that some type of precipitation developed during the day into the night, and this froze at night because it's in the desert, and therefore the rocks slid on that ice, which to me doesn't make much sense, because if they slid on ice as if you were sliding them across a hockey rink, they're not going to make this definitive type of trail in the dirt when the ice thawed the next morning. At least that's my perception just by looking at these images. But the main point is that scientists say that it's a done deal. They've basically determined that these rocks are moving because of atmospheric conditions. Now that's key, because of atmospheric conditions, and there's a link to one of the articles in this PDF here. If they're moving due to atmospheric conditions, it's very funny because we see the same rocks, the same type of rocks rather, not in geological terms, but the same kind of anomaly photographed on the moon. If you look at the PDF file, Never a Straight Answer, that you can download on the website, under the section Moon Sailing Stones, you will see 4 different photographs from the moon. And one of them is a very interesting piece of evidence that shows a crater with one of these rocks moving in the crater. And this rock, and the reason that we know they're moving is because there's a definitive trail behind them. And some of these rocks are big. Some of these rocks are not a couple of feet across. They're maybe in some cases a couple 100 feet across. These are big, big rocks. I mean, these are boulders, and that might be an understatement. Well, the first picture here I pulled directly from NASA, and there's the website link on there if you want to go see the photo on NASA's website. It is from the Lunar Observer number 5, LOV, frame 168H2. LOV frame 168H2. You can clearly see this object moving right next to a crater. It's a pretty big rock casting a shadow near the crater, and you can see it in the middle of that photograph in the PDF. Now, if you go down to the next photo, directly underneath of that, this photo, I took this from Fred Steckling's book, and it has the information at the bottom of the photograph. This is from Apollo 16, photo number 16 for Apollo 16, 19067. So photo number 16, 19067 for one of the Apollo missions, Apollo number 16. And you can clearly see this big crater, and you see the same type of trail. That this is the most damning piece of evidence, ladies and gentlemen. You see this huge trail that comes across the surface of the moon, goes down inside of the crater. It's a big crater. I don't remember the estimate of how deep this crater was, but it's more than a couple of feet. And then you see this trail that goes through the center of the crater and up the other side of the crater. Now, what could cause a rock in any capacity to roll down a crater, through the crater, and up the other side? That's the most important part. What is pushing this rock to move up the other side? So here's the thing. If NASA is claiming that these are just anomalies and they just can't explain them, so we shouldn't think about it too much, you have scientists here on Earth looking at the same phenomena in the desert, saying that it's atmospheric conditions that prompts these rocks to move, then I say, okay, I'm not necessarily on board with that theory as they promote as a fact, but let's go ahead and take that into consideration and apply it to these rocks moving on the moon. If these rocks on the moon are moving, then that implies one of two things. Well, I guess one of three things, but one of specifically two things. The first one is If these rocks on Earth move because of atmospheric conditions in any capacity, that means that the rocks on the moon could perhaps be moving because of atmospheric conditions, which therefore takes the theory that NASA gives us as a fact, saying that the moon has no atmosphere. It crumbles it up and it throws it into the garbage can, because otherwise, how would we explain these anomalies that are identical to the ones we see on Earth? Scientists say they've explained the ones on Earth, but don't mention the ones in the Apollo 16 photographs or the LOV photographs, the Lunar Observer number 5 photograph of these rocks moving across the surface of the moon. And if you say it's not atmospheric conditions and therefore it's not a rock, then what is it? Is it a type of mining vehicle? It's something obviously artificial, or at least in some way it has to be intelligently designed, especially to move in such a precise, linear motion in a perfectly straight line down, through, and up the other side of a crater. And there's two other photographs here. One is NASA photo from the Lunar Observer number 5, photo number 67H1135. And there's two versions of this photograph here. One is a closer-up image of the one above it. So there's two photos on this page. The top one is the original photo. The one underneath of it is a zoomed-in, enhanced version of the other photo. And in both photos, it becomes even clearer. In the second photo, you can see an object moving very distinctly across the surface of the moon. If it's atmospheric conditions, that means the moon has an atmosphere. I mean, that's the only way that you can explain this phenomena. If it's not atmospheric conditions, and therefore we can't explain it through that type of scientific means, then we have to, at least I would propose, assume that it's artificial in some nature. Now, that doesn't mean I said aliens are on the moon moving rocks around, but perhaps there is some type of human-like base on the moon. Perhaps humans have already established a base on the moon. Perhaps beings much older than us, species much older than our species, already exist on the moon, have existed on the moon for generation after generation, thousands, perhaps millions of years. And this is the remnants of their civilization. Perhaps this is a drone that is moving across the surface of the moon, that there's no longer alien beings there in the traditional sense. Their civilization has long been gone, wiped out, or maybe they left this as some type of observatory, some type of mining outpost, some type of, just something that's been set up on the outskirts of the galaxy, of the Milky Way, and they just have left this and they care nothing about it. It's no different than, humans, building buildings and then just abandoning them years later. Perhaps this is some type of drone, kind of like that movie WALL-E, where Wally's just left on Earth to clean everything up. Maybe that's what this is. Either way, the point is, ladies and gentlemen, that if we have images on Earth of rocks moving across the desert, we have these same images on the moon. Scientists on Earth claim that these rocks on Earth move because of atmospheric conditions, because of water freezing and the rocks sliding on that ice. If that's true, then the photographs on the moon can really only be described in the same fashion. Therefore, the moon has an atmosphere, and we have been deceived into believing that the moon is some dead planetary sphere, which I think is what many people in certain positions of power, perhaps other entities, want you to believe, when in fact the moon is very active and alive. And if we cannot explain the movement of these rocks or these boulders, photographed here by Apollo 16 and the Lunar Observer number 5, if we can't explain these due to atmospheric conditions, some type of scientific explanation, then perhaps they are mining vehicles for a civilization that exists now on the moon, perhaps human civilization, our species, or perhaps an ancient civilization that's long gone and disappeared, and these are the remnants of that culture. Perhaps these objects are still moving. Perhaps they are solar-powered. Perhaps they have some type of advanced extended battery life. Whatever the case may be, these could be drones in some capacity. This is a really fascinating topic to me, and I think it's something that really should be addressed, especially if you have an interest in understanding the moon. I mean, I have had so many people. I remember Dimitri, who used to host the D Show. I used to do the D Show at WPRK. It was an old radio station in Orlando, Florida, one of the top college stations in the country, just behind Miami University. I think we got second place for best college radio. And when I did the radio show there, Dimitri and I would talk about a lot of the same types of subjects. And one night we went out, we were taking a walk, and he just looked up at the moon and said, you know, it just pisses me off that thing just, it's so fake. And it's really funny that he said that, because I was thinking the other day, I was talking to Mike D., who we are going to bring on here in just a second, and Mike said the same thing. He said the moon just pisses him off because you look at it, and once you know this information, you know that the real color of the moon, you know the anomalies, the photographs, the moving rocks and things like that, you know that it's not what you've been told. You look at it, and it just seems so fake. It seems like some type of projection. And I just thought it was so funny that both of them said that, and that's the kind of feeling that I get when I look at the moon, that it's just fake. It's just not real. There's something odd. There's something off about the moon. What it is, I can't necessarily tell you for sure, but I will tell you that the evidence suggests that the moon is not only an outpost perhaps for extraterrestrial civilizations, perhaps an outpost for mining, or perhaps it is an outpost, it is a base that humans have constructed. Perhaps another sect of humanity, a very, very wealthy sect of humanity. Perhaps it is a corporate interests who are mining materials on the moon. Who knows what's really going on? I'm sure people that are in high levels of power within NASA, within the Defense Department, they don't truly know. Their hands are tied behind their backs as well. And the last thing is, before I call Mike up here, remember that idea of the hollow moon that I talked about in the last hour, and the idea that when the moon gets close, it's not even an idea. I think I misspoke. It's a fact. When the moon gets close to the Earth and the Earth's gravity kind of compresses and pulls like a baker kneading dough on the moon, the gravitational effect of the Earth pulls on the moon makes this creaking sound, almost as if it's not only hollow, but that it's almost some type of, it sounds like a ship or something creaking as it gets close to the Earth. It's kind of that old kind of cargo ship feeling. And then I played you this clip here. I'll play this again from British Columbia this year, 2015. And the same sound has been heard all over the globe on Earth. And this is the kind of sound that I hear in my head when I think of the moon creaking like the hull of a ship when it gets close to Earth. So I'm not saying that this sound is the sound of the moon. I'm saying that this sound is perhaps the sound of the Earth. And therefore, with these major sinkholes in Siberia, which eventually will be the North Pole, with these sounds that are heard below ground, these booming sounds, this, I think, is a destabilization of the Earth's crust. And these loud sounds that we hear, such as this here, is perhaps a creaking of the inside of the Earth. Now, perhaps I'm a little bit out there, I'm a little bit crazy, but I'll tell you what, at least I'm here putting together a well-conceived theory of what's going on, and I'm not just sitting back saying, oh, look, Honey Boo Boo's on again. Oh, look, it's the X Factor. Let's sit down and order a pizza and watch. Looking at things that could really just expand the horizon of all possibilities. And I'm basing this on the idea, on the photographic evidence we have, that if beings of immense intelligence can create craft like the one photographed by, not Sputnik, by Phobos 2 in the 1980s, craft that were photographed by the Curiosity rover last year, 2014, craft that have been photographed by the HalioViewer and SOHO by the Sun, craft that have been photographed on the rings of Saturn. I have photographs of all of these in that PDF, Never a Straight Answer, and you can download that for free at thesecretteachings.info. If beings have the technology, even if it's spiritual in whatever way that might be, to build and construct massive craft that are the size of a planet in width, then perhaps not only is the moon a hollowed-out planetary sphere, and we'll get to all of those anomalies here in just a moment, but perhaps the Earth is also a hollowed-out planetary sphere, one that is artificial in nature. So think about that for a second. Perhaps the Earth is artificial in nature. I think that it's an interesting idea. I've ran that idea past some people. They're kind of skeptical to it. Who could blame them? It's kind of out there on the edge. But then again, if 100 years ago I would have said the moon is hollow and doesn't belong there, people would have told me that I was crazy. People today still tell me I'm crazy, even though we have people that tell me I'm crazy usually believe the official reports, and the official reports from NASA say that the moon is essentially hollow. The vibrations that have been sent through the moon on several occasions, through the crashing of the third stage of one of the Apollo missions, just basically reverberated through the moon and out the other side, and it did not hit a central core and ring back. NASA says that the moon vibrated for 3 hours on this occasion and rang like a gong. The moon's hollow, perhaps the Earth is hollow as well. Let me go ahead and bring Mike D on the program, and we will get his take on all of this, and then we will get into the hollow moon. Not the theory, but the facts behind the hollow moon. Also have some interesting information about artificial satellites that I found here as well. Hey, Mike D.
Hello. Yes, sir.
Hey, we are live on The Secret Teachings. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good.
Well, I'm glad to have you back. We had a great show last night. I've had a great show so far tonight, and I thought that I'd give you a call, and I thought that we could finish up our talk about the hollow moon. How does that sound?
Yes, let's do it.
You know, last year, if you listen to The Secret Teachings, Mike D and I did a show last January, I think it was in 2014, so 2 Januaries ago, about the hollow moon. And it got a lot of feedback, and I listened to it recently. I thought it was a great show, and I thought that we could incorporate that information, the facts that we have, into the topics that we've been discussing. So, Mike, what do you know about the moon? I know the other day you told me it kind of pisses you off and that it's something that you'd like to see blown out of the sky. Why would you say that?
Well, you know, that's a joke, but you know, from our conversations and from research, it's, in my opinion, it's not a natural moon of the Earth, and we can talk about that and go through the reasons, but I really think it was placed here, and I'm not sure of 100% why, but it could have been that it's some type of like a post, a fueling post, or something that was used, and that has, because as we know, the moon is very, very, very old, right? Older than the Earth, and I think there's beings on the moon. I don't know who they are or what they are, but you know, from what I've seen on research-wise, there is something very strange. There's objects definitely there. The transmissions from astronauts on the moon, seeing ships and vehicle tracks and everything else. There's definitely somebody on the moon. What they're doing with these bases, of course, you know, and they're no dummies. They put it on the dark side so that we never see that side of the moon, of course. So that's the perfect spot to put a base where no one with a telescope or anything else can see what you're doing. But what they're doing on the moon, I am not 100% sure, but I don't think the moon is a natural satellite. I think it's totally artificial.
No, according to what we are officially taught about the moon in school, science class, what you might hear on the Science Channel or the Discovery Channel, that information we know is false because I have evidence in front of me from these same sources that prove those sources to be incorrect, if you know what I mean. So I have photographs here, for example, one from the Lunar Observer number 5 and one from Apollo 16, and I gave out the photo numbers already, where you can clearly see this object making a distinctive trail on the surface of the moon. One of these objects in the Apollo 16 photo, Mike, I know you've seen this, goes down the crater, across the crater, and up the other side of the crater and out. Now, on Earth, we call these sailing stones, stones that are moved, according to scientists, by atmospheric conditions. However, we are told the moon has no atmosphere. So if that's not a proper explanation, then this has to be some type of either mining equipment, some type of observatory equipment, something that is moving, whether it's intelligently designed, whether it's used by another species, whether it's the remnants of an ancient culture, an ancient society, or maybe it's the remnants of an ancient base we had on the moon or a base that we have there now. Maybe it's kind of like WALL-E, just kind of moving around after all of the people left, and it's just this robot that's moving around the Earth. It's powered by the sun. Who knows? Whatever the case may be, we see these images. What do you think of these sailing stones? What do they say to you?
Yeah, I think I think the stones on Earth. I do think that's some type of weather condition. But they like you just said, they attribute it to that atmospheric condition. We're told the moon doesn't have an atmosphere, so how are these things moving?
Exactly.
It's just, and then of course, people for centuries with telescopes have seen flashes of lighter color on the moon, things moving on the surface. Water, like a misty kind of water cloud moving across the surface. I mean, it's crazy.
And that's actually been documented by NASA. They recorded this mist of water vapor that moved across the surface in a huge fashion. I think it was like miles and miles and miles long that moved across the surface of the moon. They picked it up with the sensors that were left during the Apollo missions, and they claim that they could never explain this properly. They didn't know how to explain it. And I know
exactly.
You watched this documentary the other day, right? That what was it? Alien bases on the moon.
Yes.
Didn't they show a video in that? I can't remember what Apollo mission it was. It was being filmed from one of the lunar descent modules, and they were passing over the moon, and there was this object jutting out from the surface. It was on video, and it sprayed this kind of mist out. Do you remember that?
Vaguely, honestly.
Okay, I didn't know if you recalled that, but anyway, there is a NASA video, official NASA video that's never been like retracted and it was a mistake. It was just right out there in the open. There's this image of something that's kind of being sprayed, almost as if it's coming from the interior of the moon. But regardless of that, you're right, there's a lot of anomalies on the moon. What else has been reported? Bridges that span the center of a crater. Moon rocks, dated moon rocks, being 5.3 billion years old on the moon. Moon rocks dated 5.3 billion years old. That's incredible. Yeah, that is that's something that is probably some of the most damning evidence when it comes to talking about the moon and how old the moon is, where it came from. I mean, what were you told about the moon, Mike? Where did the moon come from? What was the story you were told?
By my parents or whoever?
Well, by whoever, by your parents. By what did you learn in school? What did your parents teach you?
If I remember correctly, in school, I think they said that the moon came off. There was a collision with another planet, and the moon came off the debris from that planet, or something garbage like that. But I was told that if the moon ever went away, it would disrupt our oceans and the tides because that's all controlled by the moon. Now, maybe you can enlighten me a little bit about that. If the moon was, let's say, destroyed, would the oceans go crazy? They wouldn't be controlled. The tides would go backwards. What would happen, if anything?
What I would assume is that there would probably be some type of erratic environmental shift. But when we say that removing the moon would cause some type of a catastrophe, I mean, I think it would, but it would cause a catastrophe to our current society. Perhaps to a society that existed in the past when there, let's say, was no moon. Maybe, obviously if there was no moon, this moon-type satellite was brought in, and as it was brought in and put into orbit around the Earth, it caused great cataclysms initially, And what we have today, landmass-wise, and in terms of the oceans, is a result of the moon being brought in to this orbit around Earth. If we were to remove it, perhaps the Earth would go back to how it was however many millions or billions of years ago. I mean, the Greeks actually had a story about a goddess of the moon named Selene, and there's a group of people that Aristotle wrote about called the Proselenes, who lived during a time in ancient Greece when there was no moon. And this was written about in several different cultures. There was a time when there was no moon, and when the moon was brought in, it brought about great catastrophes. There's stories from Tibet about the people in the land of Gondwana, and when the moon was brought in, it brought about a great cataclysm. This led to the sinking of huge chunks of land. Advanced cultures were wiped out, and the giants were killed as a result of this.
Yeah, I mean, I probably would agree with you that there would be some type of environmental changes, but nothing that I don't think we could overcome as a society. I think there would definitely be some changes, but once that kind of settled down, you'd look up in the sky and you would see no moon.
Well, there's a couple of things that I wanted to get to. One of them is what you already mentioned, the rocks, the moon rocks. So let's talk about that, and then I wanted to throw you a curveball. I don't know if I've got this information here about artificial planetary bodies I wanted to see if you knew about. But let's talk about the moon rocks for a second. You already said that some of these rocks are older, or the moon is older than the Earth, which means if what you were told in school, Mike, that some type of planetary body, something struck the Earth in its early primordial stage, and the moon came off of that, what they call the whack theory, right?
Yes.
And then they said that they couldn't work out the physics for that, so they invented this new theory called the double whack theory. And they're actually both called theories, with the whack theory and the double whack theory. And it's funny that they're called theories, and yet they're pushed in school as a fact, as if we know this for sure, and yet they don't. Now, what's interesting is that it should be common sense, right, Mike? If the moon is older than the Earth, then how did the moon spin off of the Earth as a planetary body? That just doesn't make sense to me. Maybe I just didn't take enough math classes to figure that kind of math out.
Yeah. Agreed. The moon is the moon is mysterious for sure, because another thing, we said the dust of the moon and the rocks are completely different from the rocks themselves.
That's
meaning
right.
That contrary to the theories that the dust resulted from weathering and the breakup of the rocks themselves, the chemical composition of the dust and rocks are completely different. So meaning that the rocks had to come from somewhere else. So where these rocks come from?
That's right. You're exactly right. The rocks on the moon have a different chemical composition than the soil, than the dust. And what's even more fascinating is if the moon rocks are older than Earth rocks by a billion years. The oldest Earth rocks we have are somewhat of 3 to 3.5 billion years old. Now, moon rocks are dated by NASA and other scientists that work with these rocks to be 4.5 billion years old, which is roughly the age of our solar system, meaning that the moon would have had to essentially form prior to the solar system forming, and then the moon came about after the solar system formed, like it came into the solar system. That's the only explanation that could be given to explain why the moon rocks are older than the solar system and older than the body that it apparently spun off of in the first place by over 1 billion years. That's a lot of time.
Indeed, yes.
1 billion years.
Indeed. And another thing, too, is moon rocks are magnetized. Again, there's no magnetic field on the moon, so how is that possible? So there's no way that close call whack theory doesn't make any sense, because if something like that really happened, the moon would have been ripped apart too. If it ever a close call with Earth, if it ever got so close that the rocks were magnetized by the Earth's field, that would have ripped the moon apart. So that doesn't make any kind of sense to me that these moon rocks are magnetized.
They are magnetized. A lot of the moon rocks that were recovered were found, I think it was by the Soviets, were found to not rust at all. And this is even what's stranger. Some of the rocks found by the Soviets didn't rust, and some of the rocks found by Apollo, I think it was Apollo 16, actually had rusted iron embedded in the rock. And in order to get rust, you need oxygen and free hydrogen for the process of oxidation, which means that there again has to be some type of atmosphere on the moon, or had to have been one in the past, for this material to be in the moon rocks that we collected. But I just thought it was strange that two different sets of material that was found, one by Apollo and one by the Soviets, they found that some of the rocks would not rust, and some of the rocks that Apollo found were rusted. And that's the one I'm more interested in, because if they rusted, then there obviously, again, has to be an atmosphere on the moon. And again, we're being misled about the true nature, the true composition of the moon as a satellite of Earth. It's just really strange to me. I mean, I guess we missed that class, Mike, in school, NASA Mathematics 101, where you go in and they tell you, okay, look, what we got here is we've got Earth, it's 3.5 billion years old. We've got the moon, it's 4.5 billion years old. It's older than the solar system. Now, come up with an idea of how the moon spun off of the Earth, and let's work that math backwards. We'll just go ahead and we'll shave off 1 billion years so it correlates with our most brilliant minds of the time, who are just taking shots in the dark until something sounds like it works.
Yeah, exactly. Or NASA, founded by Nazi scientists. You would think, some of these guys who started NASA probably kept some of the same ideology that they had as Nazis.
Absolutely.
That, they would take things and keep them secret from the masses just for the elite. So they were perfect. They were perfect for NASA, and people don't even realize that. They don't realize how NASA was formed and who formed it and where these scientists came from. They might have heard Operation Paperclip mentioned here or there, but all they think is a conspiracy theory when it's those are a proven fact documents of that. That no one made that name up. That's a legit operation that happened. That's crazy.
That's right. Werner von Braun, one of the main scientists who worked with the Nazi rocket program. I mean, that was the actual foundation of NASA. A lot of other prominent Nazis who were deemed war criminals eventually came to work for Bell Aeronautics, for BASF, for Bayer in the 1950s. Some of the most notorious, I guess you could call them war criminals, that were helped out of the country, out of Europe, by the operation, I think it was called Odessa, run by the Red Cross and the Vatican, as well as the Central Intelligence Agency, or what would later become the Central Intelligence Agency. So obviously there's a huge, huge part that plays a major role in relation to what you're mentioning and the information that we have, where the entire program that brought about all of this information about the moon and about our solar system came from the same minds who hoarded information in, I guess you could say, it's very superficial and very generalized, but in Nazi Germany, the same people that ran that Reich are the same people that are then telling us, hey, look what we found on the moon. And they just don't care. They'll say, look, the moon's 4.5 billion years old. The Earth's 3.5 billion years. But you people are too stupid to figure out that we're going to tell you that the moon spun off of the Earth, and even though there's 1 billion years difference, you're not going to figure it out.
Yeah, or you're just going to be so distracted that you won't even care.
That's right. And I actually put another note in this PDF file that I know I sent you, and listeners, you can follow along with all of these notes if you go to thesecretteachings.info, and you can download the file, the PDF file, Never a Straight Answer. It's completely free. I read an article not too long ago, Mike, that purported that the water on Earth is actually older than the sun. Have you ever heard that?
I've never heard that.
So what would you say to that? I mean, we know that the moon is older than the solar system, which calls into question a lot of things. But if the Earth's water is older than the sun, maybe that means it came from comets.
Somewhere else.
It had to have come from somewhere else, perhaps, yes.
Yeah. Very plausible if that's true.
You know,
people when people think about the moon being an artificial satellite, they get all sorts of confused in their head because they're thinking, wait a minute, how does that get constructed? First off, because it's massive, it's huge. How do you move it? How do you steer it? Where is it built from? How is it shipped over here? They start
where's the gear shift?
They start thinking logistics, and they start thinking our technology, and that's where their brain gets fried, because you can't think in that concept of, well, if we can't do it with our technology, then no one else can.
That's a fantastic point. That's actually one of the main points I've been trying to make this weekend, and I'll continue on next week's edition of The Secret Teachings, where I go into a third part of this information, and that is, if we're looking at this idea that is backed up by official science as well as alternative forms of investigations and just basically critical thinking and using elementary math to deduct that 4.5 billion is more than 3.5 billion in terms of the age of the moon and Earth. If we look at this and say the moon could not, if it was an artificial body, it could not be constructed. There's no way to build something that big. The resources alone, you'd have to go through multiple solar systems to be able to accumulate them probably. And you're exactly right, Mike. We base that assumption off of the idea that what we have here on Earth is all that we have. We base it off of current technology. I mean, you don't see your local Toyota dealership selling, planetary bodies, so it must just not exist. But if we base that idea off of our technology, we'll never understand that something much greater could exist out there. Just because humans can't do it doesn't mean it hasn't been done. And I wanted to say one last thing, Mike. When you compare something like an artificial satellite like the moon, and you compare that idea with our current technology, you couldn't conceive of it. So the evidence I try to put out there for people is that if you look at the images that we talked about last night on the show, Phobos in 1989 taking a photo of that large cylindrical object that was larger than the moons of Mars. You look at the photo taken over the surface of Mars by the Curiosity rover, the ones taken by the Halio viewer and SOHO, and the ones taken on the rings of Saturn that I discussed in the first hour of tonight's show. These objects, if they are vehicles of any sort, even spiritually, whatever the case may be, they are so massive they are the width of an entire planetary body. If beings have the know-how, spiritual, technological, whatever the case may be, to build something that big for observation or for whatever they might be using it for, don't you think that they might have the technology to build a hollowed-out spaceship like the moon that's roughly a quarter of the size of some of these large cylindrical UFOs?
Are you asking me? Of course, yes.
It's a fraction of the size of some of these objects that have been officially photographed by NASA. And they're just written off as an anomaly. NASA says it's an anomaly, we can't explain it, move on. And they don't actually address it, right? I mean, that's what's crazy to me. They don't actually address it when the evidence is there.
Yeah, exactly. Or people's conception are swayed by movies, so they see Star Wars and they see the Death Star and they think, well, that's an artificial object, but that's just in movies, that's sci-fi, that can't happen. I mean, it's just they'll go that way. Oh, it's a movie. You've seen it in a movie. It's made up. It's Hollywood. When we know at least that Hollywood gets many of its ideas from groups, corporations, people in the know, and they'll litter Hollywood films with images and symbols that, unless you know what you're looking for, you won't even see it. Like we had, his name,
Mike Lebecki.
Mike Lebecki and Sullivan.
Oh, Robert Sullivan.
Robert Sullivan on his books on the cinema images.
Yep.
I got off topic there, but
No, it's not off topic at all. I think everything obviously comes around full circle. I wanted to talk about more specifics of the hollow moon, and I remember last year when we talked about this, we went into a lot of extreme detail, and I wanted to bring some of those details out now so people that are listening who maybe have not heard about this before and thinks that these are just two crazy guys who don't have PhDs talking on the radio. Let me give you some of the information that is officially from NASA that would, I guess, back up the theory, which is just as much credible, maybe even more so than the official theories from NASA about how the moon came about. But let us give you this information about our theory, if you will, about the moon being hollow. And some of the Apollo missions, Mike, they placed these seismographs on the moon to detect seismic activity. We're told the moon is a dead planetary body. There's no activity at all. Well, officially, over the span of a decade, over 3,000 moonquakes a year, that's 30,000 moonquakes, they call them, within a span of a decade, were captured. Now, a lot of these were contributed to by falling meteors, falling booster rockets, but some of them were not attributed to by meteorites or falling booster rockets. Some of them came from the inside of the moon, which is very strange because we find later that during one of the Apollo missions, Apollo 12, in 1969, the Apollo 12 crew slammed the lunar module descent into the moon and recorded the seismic activity. In that case, the moon vibrated for about an hour. It just completely vibrated. Typically, you'd see the vibrations go through, hit the center of the moon, and reverberate back. NASA was just doing this initial test to see if they could get kind of the idea of how deep the moon was and if there were cavities, kind of like ground-penetrating radar, right?
Yes, I know what I know what the end result was.
It's incredible. So the next mission, because Apollo 12, they were just doing it because NASA wanted to run some type of test. They weren't doing it because of any prior knowledge, at least officially. So then Apollo 13, which, by the way, I have read on several occasions was actually carrying a small tactical nuclear charge aboard the ship. That charge was disabled, and as that charge was disabled, the entire mission fell apart. And that's the famous Apollo 13 movie that you might have seen with Tom Hanks. I didn't see anything in that movie about a nuclear weapon being aboard the lunar module. But anyway, they took one of the parts of the rocket, the third stage of the rocket, and they smashed it into the moon after they scrapped the Apollo 13 mission and brought the astronauts back. They slammed this rocket into the moon with over 11 tons of TNT, a massive explosion, and the moon vibrated for 3 hours. NASA says that it, quote, rang like a gong. What do you think?
Yeah, it's pretty, you gave the explanation, but it still doesn't make any sense to me why they would make those detonations on the moon's surface. I think they were actually I think they knew that the moon was hollow. They knew the moon was hollow, but they just wanted to confirm it with some other test. And then when that rang out like a bell, they again, already knew that the moon was hollow on the inside.
See, that's kind of where I'm leaning. I think certain people already had this knowledge, and I wanted to tell you this. Before I brought you onto the show, I talked about it for a moment. In 1946, there was an Army Ordnance project to do the exact same thing that NASA did a couple of years ago. Remember when they sent that rocket to the moon? They said they were looking for water.
Yes.
Yeah, remember that? When you first saw that, what did you think? Because I was thinking we were attacking some type of base on the moon. It was some type of warfare. They're claiming they're looking for water. I didn't buy it.
I didn't buy it either, but I had no clue what they were trying to do with that.
Well, here's the thing, though. There was an Army Ordnance project in 1946, Mike, and this was a year before the famous Roswell crash. And the plan, I don't know if you knew this or not, the plan in 1946 was to, and this is the word that the Army Ordnance Project used, bombard the moon and Mars and other planets with projectiles launched on V-2 rockets. And the reason that they were doing this was to determine, they claim, the composition of the planet to see how it reacted to these kinds of conditions. Now, that, coupled with the fact that we began to detonate nuclear weapons in the 1940s, the fact that we launched rockets at the moon, Mars, and other planets in the solar system, do you maybe think that that is a contributing factor to the unbelievable, almost excessive amount of sightings of these seemingly advanced spacecraft, that perhaps we are being monitored because we've just become out of control?
Well, perhaps. I mean, we definitely know the stories about UFOs over nuclear facilities and them shutting off, the nukes, and then causing all sorts of equipment failures at these nuclear facilities. And they're seen over those facilities all the time. And in battle zones, too. I guess they probably just, for them, maybe it might be entertainment to see these silly humans, like, slaughtering each other. But UFOs are definitely found over those installations a lot, and that's a proven fact just by the mere number of sightings, and then also wartime sightings of UFOs.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's been contributed to by the fact of the nuclear weapons being detonated, and I actually, up until a couple of days ago, I didn't know about this program that the Army had to literally just shoot rockets at the moon and Mars to see what the effects of that would be. I mean, I would think that coupled with the fact that they rammed essentially a bomb into the moon in the 1960s, 1969, that maybe this pissed off whatever was on the planet. Maybe it's the beginnings of some type of warfare. But whatever the case may be, the evidence is still pretty clear. I mean, even Carl Sagan made the claim that, quote, quote, a natural satellite cannot be hollow, meaning that a planetary body, a satellite that's come into orbit around a planet or maybe spun off the planet in a whack theory kind of a way, that this satellite cannot be hollow. I mean, it goes against the base for what science is established on, the concepts of relativity and gravity. If the outer parts of the moon are the hardest, and the further into the center you go, it gets softer and lighter, that goes against the very fundamental laws that science is based on. I mean, remember reading about how the center of the moon is basically, or at least close to the center, is softer, and the outside that should be on the inside is actually harder than the inside of the moon, meaning that whatever was inside of the moon had to have been essentially scooped out like removing a yolk from an egg. So maybe the moon is natural in the sense that it formed natural, but perhaps it was artificially hollowed out.
True. I mean, I think I was told in school, too, about, the moon had all these huge volcanoes, and that's where some of the craters formed because of the lava. But, from our research, the moon's craters, some of them originated internally, but there's no, and this is from scientists themselves, there's no indication that the moon was ever hot enough to produce volcanic eruptions. So there's another mystery.
Another mystery. Perhaps something has been expelled from the center, a type of mining project, digging out the center of the moon. There are old mythologies from Africa claiming that the moon, and they referred to it as an egg, was brought into our solar system, and the egg had its yolk taken out, and then it was put into close proximity to the Earth to monitor us. That's funny. You hear that story, Mike, and if you're a PhD professor, you hear these primitive people saying that the moon is an egg and that they hollowed it out, they hollowed the yolk out, and then it's put into orbit around the Earth to monitor us. You think, these people are so primitive, they thought that the moon was an egg. But that's not what they meant, was it?
No, not at all. It's a symbol. It's a symbol. It's a symbol because, the moon as a female figure, the egg, and then also it being hollowed out, it's just a way for them to, with their the way that their language, just to communicate that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like if you told somebody, I mean, it's just old written text where they say there was fire in the sky. The words didn't exist back then to describe it the way we would describe it now, so they would use what they were used to, words that they were used to using. I think it's incredible that those African tribes describe that, the moon.
Oh yeah, it shows some type of advanced knowledge beyond our comprehension.
Exactly.
I mean, the term, for example, flying saucers didn't come about until Kenneth Arnold in like the 40s and 50s. I mean, the idea of a UFO didn't come about until decades later. So obviously, when we're looking in ancient texts and we see something along the lines of fire came out of the sky, I mean, most of the time, I think a lot of these stories can be explained away as asteroids, comets passing by the orbital plane of the Earth. But a lot of them might not be asteroids or comets. A lot of them might be some type of unidentified flying craft, and perhaps we could assume that it's extraterrestrial. But they didn't say, "Hey, look, there's a UFO." I mean, that terminology, like you said, was not around at that time. They used the words that they had to explain it. And I'm sure in 1,000 years from now, things that we explain that we're unable to explain scientifically, so we explain in other manners and other ways, are going to be looked at as being very primitive. But then there might be somebody 1,000 years from now sitting down with a radio show talking about how these two guys, this Ryan and this Mike, were talking about these concepts that were so advanced and nobody else seemed to get them. How did they have this information and knowledge? Because they asked questions and they looked at the evidence for what it is rather than looking at it for what you want it to be.
Agreed. I mean, some of the metals on the moon that we talked about before are elements not found in nature on Earth. So you got uranium-236 and neptunium-237.
Yeah.
Neptunium-237 discovered in lunar rocks.
That is incredible. Uranium-236 is a radioactive waste that is produced from spent nuclear fuel rods.
Yes, that's crazy. So how's that? And that that's a good because if you remember the program Alien Bases on the Moon, they said one of the it looked like an abandoned nuclear reactor from some of the pictures that they've seen. So
well, maybe that's what that vapor coming from this almost smokestack was in one of the Apollo videos, and even perhaps some of the mist that has been documented moving across the surface of the moon coming out in these gushers. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe part of this radioactive material is coming from the internal workings of the moon. It's being kind of expelled. It's part of the process of whatever the moon is in its operational form.
Yes, I gotcha. And who's to say that the supposed alien bases on the moon were the same people that made this reactor or some of the other objects that they find on the moon? Who knows? It could have been someone else. They could be super old. They could have
could just reoccupy it.
Reoccupy an old base that they're using. We just don't know. But the theories are out there, and they should be talked about. I mean, it's very interesting. Maybe they're there trying, they were able to reverse some of this ancient technology. I mean, if you think about it, some ancient technology higher than our own is just incredible. But that means that some way along the way, that information was lost. Speaking on the moon and also speaking about on Earth. Because we're not the first civilization, from what I've read, we're the seventh on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
So past civilizations have been wiped out.
One of multiple root races. I look at some of these large cylindrical cigar-shaped unidentified flying objects, or you might call them unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAPs, whatever the case is, whatever your liking is. And you look at them and you say, why would they build something so large? And a couple of things come to my mind. First of all, maybe they built them so large because it's almost like I mean, in some cases, like the moon, it is an artificial planetary body. Maybe their world was destroyed, and they're using this as some type of artificial way to keep about the life of their species. Perhaps these are vehicles constructed to travel vast distances with some type of technology we couldn't even begin to imagine. Science fiction movies, Star Trek doesn't do it justice. And they've built these large vehicles because they're traveling so far and so long, and maybe these beings live 10,000 years, on average, and they built this massive ship so that it can accommodate them in every single way as if they're living back on their home world. Or perhaps these beings are much larger than humans, and you have to put that factor into your thought process and think, well, just because humans might die going on some type of long journey, living 60, 70 years on average, doesn't mean that another species, another race of beings might live to be 100,000 years old. They might be 50 times our size. They're completely different and outside the normal scope of what we would consider to be life or what we would consider to be possible. And I think a lot of that might comes about because of our arrogance of being a dominant species here on Earth.
Agreed. Or simply, the Earth to whoever is a very important place, and they wanted to be as close to it as possible, but not detected, hence the moon, hence, a stationary, near-perfect circular orbit. If something's very important to you, you want to stick as close to it as you can, hence put in the moon.
Very true. I just found the notes that I had on the materials on the surface of the moon, and I actually had the measurements as well. And the moon, the surface of the moon, the material is much heavier than the material that's below it. So, in a typical fashion, you should have the most dense material at the center core, and then it should get lighter as you move out to the surface, to the crust. Well, on the moon, you have a very heavy material, the heaviest, that goes down 80 miles. After that, you have a denser material, but less dense than the heaviest, that goes down another 50 miles. And then you have the final surface rock, which is near the center of the moon, that's lava-like. It goes down about 20 miles. But the heaviest material goes down 80 miles into the center of the moon. And this material is the heaviest, and it's on the surface, which really doesn't make that much sense. But, Mike, there were these two Russian scientists. I remember we spoke about them last time, Michael Vasin and Alexander Sherbakov, and they published an article in Sputnik magazine. It was entitled, "Is the Moon the Creation of Alien Intelligence?" And they proposed the idea that the moon is a hollowed-out spaceship. And they proposed all of these different variables and all of these different theories to account for the anomalies, such as the radioactive materials of uranium-236 and neptunium-237 found on the moon, the different aspects of the surface being harder and denser and heavier than the inside of the moon, that this could be kind of like a shield or like a protective plating from radiation and from bombardment of meteors and asteroids moving through the solar systems and galaxies, wherever this object moved. Regardless of that, though, the fact that two prominent Russian scientists proposed this, and this is something that's official even to this day, it's just not something that's ever written about. I would think that in this case, this evidence that these two scientists presented is more credible than anything I ever learned about based on presumptions and wishful thinking in science class about the solar system and moon. Their evidence is more on point, with more facts to back up what they're saying, and yet it is never discussed. It's never denied. It's just never discussed, and we're just told these fanciful theories that go along with what we already kind of want to believe, I guess. But do you remember these two scientists, and have you ever read that article?
Yes. I mean, everything that he talked about, and we talked about all the theories supported by all this data, and that the moon is some type of hollow entity, spaceship, whatever. And there's no data, when we talk about these, there's no data that contradicts the story. So why this isn't talked about, I mean, we kind of know the reasons, but it definitely should be, the information should be brought out to people more, because all the data supports the moon being hollow and being artificial.
That it does.
And anything that they come up with to say on the contrary can be disproven by science and fact.
The same science and fact that they use to promote the idea that people like us are insane for simply quoting, in this case, official data, which is really incredible to me, because then people want you to believe based on a willingness to disbelieve rather than the actual facts that are laid out before you. And let me ask you this question.
Yes.
This could be like the bonus question. This is double jeopardy. What year did the Soviets launch Sputnik?
Oh,
I could do the music for you if you'd like.
Yeah. Okay. 1 second. 67?
No, it was 57.
57. Oh, yeah. I got my 50. I got my 50s. My decades wrong.
1957. And that's the official date we're given. That was launched. But I wanted to.
They were the first, right?
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to get to. You would assume, before I even tell you this information, you would assume that the Russians take credit for being the first to launch this satellite, right?
Yes.
1957. They take credit for this. If the United States had launched a satellite prior, regardless of anything that got in their way, don't you think that the U.S. would have obviously made it very clear that they beat the Soviets into space? I would assume so.
Oh, for sure.
So, and of course, they wouldn't just let the Soviets claim that they won this part of the space race. So, with that being said, Mike, I want to present you with something that is officially from NASA, never been really rebuked except by what we call skeptics. This is a press release from 1954. Now, again, if you do the math, we're not using that NASA math. We're using real math here. 57 minus 54 is 3. So this was 3 years before Sputnik was launched. It was October of 1954. NASA releases a press release claiming that they picked up strange signals coming from an unidentified object orbiting near Earth. It was an object that was massive in size. Now, there have been certain individuals, astronomers, scientists, and investigators, many of them in high levels of the military, working with Project Blue Book, working with the original Project Sign, Project Grudge, who have presented information along with one astronomer who verified it, astronomer John P. Bagby, that, get this, Mike, tiny moons, they call them tiny moons, have been discovered orbiting the Earth at 18,000 miles an hour, and there have been 2 of these artificial bodies located around the Earth. They were orbiting at 400 miles and 600 miles out. Now, that's not very far at all. 400 miles and 600 miles is not far at all.
Wow.
And these 2 objects were verified by astronomers, and NASA, at the same time these objects had been verified, the same time frame, picked up strange signals that they could not identify coming off of objects that were roughly in the same location that these 2 tiny moons, as they called them, were orbiting at 400 and 600 miles out from Earth. So have you ever heard about this, and what are your initial thoughts?
I have never heard that before. I mean, we get visitors here, every day from different places. So, it doesn't surprise me, But that being, being that close, you would imagine other people would have picked that up, or something that we would have launched, a satellite maybe. But they're smart. If it's an intelligent object, it would just go around all the space junk that we have. we definitely have a lot of space junk out there, some missions floating around orbits.
Yeah, but this was in the This was 3 years before Sputnik was even launched.
Oh, that's right. We had nothing up there yet.
So there's not officially anyway.
Not officially, yes. That's pretty strange.
Tiny moons. I mean, this is really interesting because the thing that gets even stranger, Mike, is that 3 years later, roughly 3 years later, when Sputnik was launched, NASA no longer picked up these signals from these objects, and astronomers could no longer verify that they were there. Meaning that, apparently out of nowhere, two objects that were incredible in size, they were called tiny moons, were orbiting the Earth at 400 and 600 miles, roughly, out, at 18,000 miles, giving off what NASA called in 1954 strange signals. Now, if these objects came into an orbit around the Earth, just happened to find themselves in a perfect trajectory, going the proper speed to come into an orbit at exactly these precise distances, that alone is probably the definition of what many might call a miracle. It's next to impossible. For one, let alone two. Then, 3 years later, after the Russians launched Sputnik, these objects disappear. So what are can we run the statistics on what's the statistical probability that two objects would come into close enough proximity to Earth and the right speed, right trajectory to come into an orbit with the planet and then to one day just simply disappear? Now, keeping in mind that when these objects were basically being observed, this was within that span of time when nuclear weapons were being detonated on Earth, and UFO sightings started to pick up drastically, that these two objects came into orbit and perhaps were being used as a type of beacon, as a type of observation station to monitor what was taking place on Earth. Perhaps these objects were objects that were dropping off some of the large, what might be called motherships that allowed some of these other small UFO flying discs, to speak very, very generally, onto the Earth to observe what was taking place, some of these ships that shut down nuclear installations. But either way, two objects come into orbit, and then one day they just disappear.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hear about that a lot with some of these UFOs where you have like a mothership, and then all of a sudden that mothership disappears, and you have, other objects that came out of it or form. So you have one big object, and all of a sudden you have 10 objects that form when that big object disappears. So, yeah, that could be the mothership, and could be, drones of some sort, too.
I think they were some type of observation station, kind of like maybe it was a ship, but maybe it was a type of satellite, something that was monitoring what was going on here on Earth. These beings are just chilling back, they're relaxing, and then they see that Earth is going through this cataclysmic time. There's this major wars, and there's humans. They detonated 2 nuclear weapons. We might as well get in the ship and go see what the hell these guys are up to this time. We already hit them with the bubonic plague. That didn't work.
They don't learn, these humans. They don't learn.
No. In fact, when you said earlier that these craft were monitoring, wars as they were taking place, it reminded me of the crows that we talked about in the Spirit Animal episode a couple of weeks ago. How the crows kind of monitor the humans killing themselves, and then they go down and they eat.
Yeah, they hang out in the trees. They would follow soldiers into battle because they knew it was basically an easy meal.
Didn't during the what was it, the Civil War, it was the American Revolution, maybe it was the Civil War, I can't remember. Didn't people used to go out and picnic while they watched the two sides battle?
Then what did you say? People used to
the people would go out and picnic. They would watch.
Oh yeah. That civil happened a lot more Civil War since there was a lot more dead. Yeah, but people would go out in the battlefield and steal, whatever they could from the soldier, whether it be a pocket watch or whatever. They would basically rob the dead soldiers. There's so many of them because the Civil War, we had advanced weaponry, but we didn't have advanced medical techniques. They had this mass slaughter of people, but no way to save a lot of them without hacking off limbs, and a lot of guys to die in the battlefield because of sickness and whatnot. The Civil War, we should talk about it sometime, because that was a disgusting, nasty conflict.
Yeah. You know what? What do you say? You're going out on a first date with somebody, and you say, well, where are we going tonight? Well, we're going to go down to the battlefield, and we're going to watch these people slaughter each other. Great. I brought a picnic blanket.
Yeah.
I mean, is that how it went down? I don't know, but it's the same kind of thing, of just observing the destruction. Maybe it's a form of humans are entertained by it. Maybe these beings are entertained by it. Maybe they're concerned, but they're also entertained by it.
Yeah, maybe some of them. And then others are probably, shaking their heads.
Like, what? Look at this! Look at this trash.
Not to say that humanity itself is people think, oh, what are you saying? You're a human. You're not like yourself.
Yeah, you're self-hating.
No, we're not talking about that. We're talking here's an example, right? So you have people that say that this hybrid between alien and human, are going to come down and take over the planet, and we'll start from scratch with this advanced human alien hybrid where it's supposed to be better than what's humanity on the earth. Do I agree with that? Oh, hell no. I think however long it takes for us to get to that level of consciousness, you leave us alone and let us work it out, because I do have faith in humanity that we're going to change things and not destroy this planet, and maybe that's just a positive way of thinking, but I don't want. We've already been messed with once, right, or lots of times, and not been able to go down that genetic tree for us to grow by ourselves and learn from ourselves from some of these other species.
Wisdom is not bestowed; it is achieved.
Exactly, and so saying that humanity is a lost cause is not something that I'm saying. And I don't think neither are you. So.
No. I don't think humanity is a lost cause. It's kind of a joke, but it's also, a possibility. Maybe these beings are coming to be entertained. Humans are entertained by desensitized forms of warfare and sports and warfare in general, actual warfare. We play video games about it. I mean, it's something that maybe our maker, being made in their image, is also very intrigued by the concepts of death and war and battle. Maybe it's something
but
that they like.
A lot of people that die in war, soldiers, get duped. They get duped.
Well, that's true. So maybe these beings are here to help these souls that die in battle kind of transcend into another life.
Yeah, because you're not going to see a DuPont or a Rockefeller on the front line. You're not going to see these congressmen that get their sons and daughters out of wars. These Clintons that avoid the wars. Those are the people that start them, but they don't fight them. They just, it's all a facade.
What I think should happen is that we should just next war that starts, and the proxy war is starting every day. Just take George Bush in that wheelchair, roll him out to the front lines, and turn away and walk away. Maybe we'll get a picnic blanket and sit down.
Yeah, just, throw an M16 in his hand. So here you go.
There you go.
On the front line. What is this?
I don't understand.
It's a gun.
It's a gun. Exactly. I'll send Dick Cheney out there with him. Dick Cheney will take care of anybody in the way. He's dual wielding probably. Anyway, though, I wanted to get.
He only knows how to shoot shotguns, though.
Yeah, you have to be really close. The moon anomalies, though, I wanted to talk about these for a second. That the moon is 400 times smaller than the sun, Mike, and at an eclipse, the moon is 400 times closer to the Earth, which, because of this anomaly, as it's considered to be, the moon is the exact same size as the sun during a solar eclipse. The sun hits its lowest point in the midwinter, and the moon is at its brightest when the sun is at its lowest point, its highest point in the midsummer. The moon is at its lowest point. So that is really interesting. When the sun is at its lowest point in the winter, the moon is at its brightest, and when the sun is at its highest point in the summer, the moon is at its lowest. It rotates on its axis in the time frame that it takes the Earth, in the time frame that it takes to orbit the Earth, and that's why we always see one side of the moon. Now, just those, what we might call anomalies, Mike, are really interesting in the sense that it almost seems impossible for an object that obviously was not, simple mathematics can prove that the moon did not spin off of the Earth, and that science has shown that the rocks on the moon, and the moon is older than the solar system, meaning that regardless if the moon is hollow, putting that to the side for a second, the fact that this object older than our solar system would have come into our solar system and just happened to hit the right trajectory at the right speed precisely so that as it rotates and orbits the Earth, it rotates one time on its axis and the amount of time that it takes to orbit the Earth so precisely, Mike, that we never see the dark side, so precisely that it aligns specifically with our sun. How is that possible in nature? And the answer is, it's not.
Well, just a counterpoint, I agree with you, but, have you ever seen an intricate spider web?
I have.
If I was to explain to you, if you've never seen one before, just the sheer magnitude of the geometry involved with it and the shapes, and it's done by this insect-like creature. You might not believe it either, but it's God. It's a big G creation. Could that have all lined up according to the laws of the universe and how God works? Maybe, but maybe not. There is a science behind it, how it was placed. So maybe it's not a natural creation, which could be true and could not be true. But I think a lot of things that you just discussed before about the moon rocks and everything else, and the flashes of lights and colors, and the bell sound, I think those definitely weigh, to me, more so as the moon being a artificial satellite.
See, I also see the intricacy of a spider web, of a seashell. I find that beautiful. I find it really, really. I don't know what word I could even use to describe it, so I don't think I'll use a word. But I just find it, whatever you want to insert, incredible, amazing, fascinating.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I can see that your point about that maybe that we just don't understand these scientific laws. My counter to that counter is to push the idea, but I don't expect anybody to believe it, but just to look at the facts to say that if the moon is older than our solar system, then obviously the moon would have had to have been brought into our solar system by some way, shape, or form. If it was artificial, or perhaps it was natural, perhaps it was just a body moving through space. It came into our solar system, and it just happened to enter into an orbit around the Earth so precisely that it aligns with the orbit and rotation of the Earth, as well as the distances between the moon and the sun and the Earth. To me, I find it incredible that we find these beautiful geometries in nature, but I also find the fact that because this planetary body is older than this system that was created here in this solar system, that it has to, in some capacity, be artificial. That's at least my point. I see the natural beauty in the development of the solar system, but for this body to come in from another location and then to find this perfection within the solar system, that's what I have a little bit of a difficult time believing.
Point taken, my friend. Point taken.
So there's a lot of other moon anomalies, Mike, in terms of photographs and in terms of information about the moon. One of the things that got me was some of these photographs that I went through with the Apollo websites as well as the NASA and the JPL websites. And there was one photo in particular I wanted to ask you about because it was one that wasn't airbrushed. It wasn't removed and then, put in another location. It was exactly in the right place where it should have been when I searched for the number. It is from nasa.gov, and there is an image and a link to it if you go to thesecretteachings.info and download Never a Straight Answer, the PDF. And this is from Apollo 12. The name of the photo is AS12 517553. That's AS12 517553. Now, Mike, I don't know if you have the PDF in front of you. Do you?
I do not know.
Okay, so maybe.
But describe the picture, and I'll know what you're talking about.
Okay, so maybe you'll understand it if I explain it, right? So let's see if I can explain this properly. It is a photograph of the moon taken from orbit, and the moon is, it's got that typical gray color, but this photo is, I believe, is a color photograph and not black and white. And at the top right of the photo, you see this large cylindrical object at a slant, kind of tilted downward, and it's moving across the frame. Do you remember the photograph that I'm talking about?
I do.
What do you think about that? Do you think it's something that's so obvious that NASA just says, we'll put it out there anyway, or?
Like it shouldn't be there, but almost to the point that it's just so ridiculous that people maybe would just think it's some type of photographic lens error of some sorts. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean...
you mean that it's just something on the film?
Yes.
Like
something, some kind of, mess up with the film, like a light, I don't know, maybe how they developed it, something got messed up, and it showed up in the film, and they're just like, people asked about it, we can just say, this is something that got messed up in the development process.
And if anybody figures it out, we'll just airbrush it out. I'll say,
exactly.
We found the original image, and you'll get it in the sky. It'll be black, and there'll be no object.
I mean, you got to look at it this way: the people airbrushing and the people working for NASA and JPL are human beings too. So, maybe some of these photos that, maybe they miss certain things. We know that they can't, for some reason, categorize and organize the films worth a damn of pictures, and.
Which is
maybe
strange. It's strange,
maybe
isn't it?
Maybe that's on purpose, but they are humans, and maybe that Photoshop, program, was not working properly. And they had to use another program, and they just said, you know what, we'll just leave it in because I don't even know how to use this program.
We don't know how to use the 1965 edition of Photoshop. We don't know what to do.
Exactly.
Where's the airbrush button at?
No, yes, they had, yes. And if you think about it, like what you just said, they had Photoshop decades before we had Photoshop.
Yep, literally.
Literally. I mean, they were taking these objects out in the 50s and the 60s. But we kind of talked about that because, a lot of this technology we don't see until 20 years later.
Well, that's true. I think 20, 30, 40, 60s, in some cases 50 years.
Yeah, 60s, late 80s, and you start getting these photo editor programs coming out.
I mean, look, the DARPA just revealed the bullet that killed Kennedy. They got a bullet now that they can steer in midair.
I know, I saw that. That's crazy.
I don't actually believe that was the bullet. I know people think that, he's another conspiracy. Just it's a joke.
No, I don't think that either. But the news a couple years ago. They can control your car.
Oh yeah.
They can control. They can control planes.
That was after we did the episodes about Michael Hastings' car being hijacked. Remember that?
Yes, we sure did.
The next morning, this happened on so many occasions. The next morning after that episode, Fox News reported that yes, it is possible to hijack someone's car, but the only people that would do it was Al-Qaeda. And the name of the news segment was Al-Qaeda Behind the Wheel.
Yes. How ridiculous is that? And it's not even Al-Qaeda anymore. It's we have a new one. It's ISIS, everybody. ISIS.
Israeli Secret Intelligence Services.
We always have to have an enemy until they run out. Then, then they'll bring in, Was it Project, what's the false flag alien project name?
Project Bluebeam.
Bluebeam is correct, yes. I was going to say Blue Balls, but that was not right.
That wasn't the project. Well, that was a project during the Clinton administration, but they completed that project.
Thanks to Monica Lewinsky, that project was
completed.
She
was key in that project's completion.
Yes. And then she was given back her identity and allowed to go back into the public.
Yeah. Not so lucky for Vince Foster.
Hillary, we understand your pain. We feel for the American people. We really do.
Yeah, every time I hear that, it always reminds me of that clip from the movie Fun with Dick and Jane. You ever seen that with Jim Carrey and Téa Leoni?
Actually, never seen that movie.
Oh, you've never seen that? They got the Alec Baldwin is the head of this big corporation that Jim Carrey works at, and he's got 5 or 6 different homes. And when the company goes down, kind of like Enron did, he's on the news talking about how it hurts so bad he can understand the common person, and he's on there talking about how he had to sell one of his houses, and he couldn't even remember which one it was. It was the exact same kind of a thing. And they were making a joke about Bush because as he was crying and saying, I had to sell one of my houses. And then he stops and he's like, okay, now watch this shot. And he goes out and he takes a shot at a skeet.
Huh. Yeah, well, he had to sell one of his houses, but one of his houses was his vacation house.
Yeah, his vacation house, exactly. I have that video clip. That's a classic with George Bush, the evil doers. Watch this drive.
Evil doers.
In fact,
speaking of D-bags, Mitt Romney had a charity boxing match with Evander Holyfield. Did you see any of that?
Really? No, I did not see that.
Yeah. He went down in the second round, Mitt Romney, but it was all staged it was just ridiculous. But my question to him, if I was able to ask the question, would be, did he have his magical underwear on when he was fighting Evander?
Good question.
Because, the magical underwear is it's almost like a chastity belt, it's supposed to give you good intentions and, it's supposed to keep you from not having impure thoughts if you wear this magical underwear. Have you ever done the research on that? It is just
on the magic
ridiculous.
Underwear?
Yeah.
I used to watch the Magic School Bus when I was a kid, but not the...
Yeah, you wear it so you don't get tempted by the sins of the flesh. So you put on your magical underwear. And they don't like talking about it, but I think it would. I wish I could ask him that question after the fight. It was for a post-fight interview. I would ask him, did he have his magical underwear on?
Oh my goodness! I'm going to play this 18-second clip, and then we'll get back to a couple of things about the moon and the Earth.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then we'll be finished. But this is the famous George Bush quote about the terrorists. Here we go.
We must stop the terror.
Stop the terror.
I call upon all nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers.
Terrorist killers, Mike.
Thank you.
Here.
Now watch this drive.
Watch this drive. You hear that golf club swing and smack that ball. That is a classic. Well, it was funny. What do you think about 1,000 years from now, alien archaeologists that dig up our archives and they watch stuff like this? They look at photographs of our leaders in these robes and these suits, and they got to think that we are absolutely out of our mind, or they think these guys ruled people. These guys look like idiots. They look absolutely insane. It's a thought that goes through my head sometimes. But I wanted to address another issue that I already talked about quite in detail in the first hour of today's show, and I wanted to bring all of this together because next week we will be talking more in depth. I'll actually have Ira Robinson join me for the third part of this show, and we have just covered so much. We've talked about these large cylindrical unidentified flying objects, aerial phenomenon, these large cylinder cigar-shaped UFOs near Mars, near the moon of Earth, near the rings of Saturn, photographed near the sun. And if an intelligent species has the ability to construct such a massive craft, whether it's for long extended journeys or it's because they are much larger than we are as humans, we are like ants in their eyes, Maybe it's because they just can. I mean, look at us here on Earth. Why do we drive Hummers? Why do we drive these big monster pickup trucks? Because we can. Because it's image. Maybe they're driving around these spacecrafts trying to intimidate or trying to you know what I'm saying. It's just that kind of an idea. Why do they do it? Well, why do we do it? It's the same kind of a question. But if you look at these craft and you think, how could they build something like this? And we have such amazing photographic evidence of whatever these craft are, physical, spiritual, whatever they might be. And then it's hard for us to comprehend that an intelligent species with all of these resources, they could be mining on the moon as evidenced by the sailing stone photographs, that they couldn't construct a hollowed-out planetary body or take a natural satellite, hollow it out, and bring it into a precise orbit around the Earth as a monitoring station to monitor the genetic creation. Whatever the case may be, there's a couple of things that are for sure. We are not that special when it comes to how we view ourselves in the grand scheme of the universe. Life finds a way to exist in all conditions: radioactive, extreme heats, extreme colds. Technology for advanced interstellar space travel probably exists now here on Earth, but just because we don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and just because we haven't developed it perhaps does not mean that it could not have been developed by another species perhaps 1,000, 1,000,000 years more advanced than us. And the distance that might have to be traveled to get to our solar system is not really that vast, considering the fact that we are assuming that beings don't exist right here in our solar system. And that's the part that's the sleight of hand. They're telling us to look for alien life out there. They're saying, look out of the solar system. That's where it might be. When in reality, the evidence is very clear that the life exists here in our own solar system. And that's what's so incredible to me. And we see so much evidence of this. Well, I hit my microphone there. We see so much evidence of this. And the last thing I wanted to bring up to you, Mike, I know you probably don't have much of a viewpoint on this because I haven't sent it to you yet, but I wanted to get at least your take on it, considering everything that we've talked about. There were, other than the photographs that we have of the moon from Apollo 8 that I didn't get to tonight, where the moon is red in some cases. Let me just first of all ask you what you thought about that. What did you think of these photographs of the moon taken by the Apollo 8 mission, where the moon is actually a red color, looking like Nevada or New Mexico here on Earth?
Yeah, it's because of the the iron maybe in some of these rocks that's we found that don't rust. Maybe some of the parts of, I mean, the moon is a big object, right? And who's to say that every picture that I've seen from the moon is from the same area? So there might be areas of the moon where it might be a different color. You might go deep in some of these craters, and supposedly there's plant life.
Just like on Earth, the different regions, different photographs. Exactly.
If someone lands in, New Mexico, it's going to be different than landing in the Appalachian Mountains. So depending on where you are, that's your perspective. Now, the red, sure, that's very, very likely that the soil might, in certain places, the moon might be red.
What it's like to me is,
I don't see a problem with that.
It's like literally taking an ant, taking the ant out into the middle of the Arctic, setting the ant down, and let's say it survives, and telling it to look for life. And the ant walks for hundreds of miles before it dies, and it never found evidence of life because it's in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
So just because we land a rover on a planet and we move it around in a circle and we make funny jokes about jelly donuts and petroglyphs doesn't mean that life does not or did not exist on that planetary sphere. Until you take that rover and you map every single inch of that planet from pole to pole, from west to east, north to south, every aspect of the interior of that planet, don't open your mouth with your PhD on the wall and tell me that life does not, did not, or could not possibly exist on that planet now or in the past, because that is the height of ignorance, a complete lack of disregard for critical thinking and all possibilities. It is a state of absolute arrogance that forms out of a basic misunderstanding and a willingness to disbelieve based on arrogance and ignorance. And that is an epidemic.
Yes, no, I totally agree with you. These people, that they have to see it to believe it. Well, then ask them the same question. Do you believe in Jesus?
No,
Yes.
but he saved me.
Well, yes. Have you ever seen him? No. But you still believe he existed, and he does exist? Yes. Well, then you can't use that same thought process for life in the universe.
Well, they have an argument against that. They say, well, I'm supposed to have faith, Mike. Have more faith. I'm a man of faith, as if that makes you correct. That just means you believe something with no evidence based on the willingness to believe that it's true. Just like many people have that willingness to believe that the moon is solid because that's what they were told.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, if you want to base it on faith and odds, the odds are because of the vast universe, how large it is, and its galaxies and these stars and planets and how many they are, that the odds are overwhelmingly that there's life on other planets and there's life in the universe, life out in space.
And we're beginning to see how that's being promoted to our culture, popular culture, movies, games, whether it's magazines, comics, it's always being pushed on us. A lot of that story is, I think, being pushed to cover up some type of government within a government black operations program, but the rest of it could be perhaps to prepare us for the day we make contact legitimately or the day that we create an artificial contact in order to bring in the next phase of a global agenda by bringing in this threat of extraterrestrials. Perhaps that is the next phase, Mike D. I'm not exactly sure. And the last thing I wanted to mention for today's show, remember, we will be back next weekend. I will be here with Ira Robinson talking about some of the same concepts and a little bit more. I wanted to throw this at you. There have been these loud booming sounds that have been heard all over the globe. And I've always contributed that to the displacement of the Earth's crust. Perhaps the Earth's crust is beginning to move and it's beginning to shift. Other people say that this loud booming sound is perhaps because of fracking, which is bullshit. The loud sounds that we've heard are so loud that they are blowing windows out of cars and houses. These sounds are so loud they are heard for miles. It's not because of fracking. Okay, maybe 1% of all of these cases is because of that. Some of these sounds are enormous and massive, and some of them have been heard. Even a friend of mine called me one night in Florida. There's not much underground in Florida. And she heard these same loud booms that rattled her entire house. And she was out in the middle of nowhere in Florida, very near, actually, Titusville. She was in Christmas, Florida, which is about 10 minutes outside of Titusville, where NASA is actually located. So we hear these sounds. I think, personally, it's a displacement of the Earth's crust. The other thing we've been hearing, and this has been reported all over the Earth, everywhere, these loud creaking sounds. And I say creaking, think about it like the hull of a ship creaking, an eerie kind of a creaking. It's an old ship, something like that. Not wood, but the creaking of metal. Creaking sounds have also been heard when the moon approaches the Earth, Mike. And as the gravitational pull of the Earth pulls and pushes and, makes the moon retract and contract, it makes this creaking sound. Soviet scientist Nikolai Kozyrev also reported not only does it make this creaking sound, but when the Earth gets very close to the moon, or vice versa, when the moon gets close to the Earth, more quakes are recorded. And every time these moonquakes are recorded, they are identical to the previous moonquakes. And we also get an extensive amount of gaseous eruptions of carbon that's observed jutting out from different vents on the moon. And now this could possibly be contributed to by the fact that the moon is a hollowed-out natural and or artificial body, and that it is some type of, maybe it's large struts, some type of interior that is creaking because it's old. The funny thing is, though, we also hear this same sound on Earth, which brought me to propose that perhaps the Earth is also hollowed out, not in the traditional way that people might think of a hollow Earth, but in a whole new light. And that is the theory I'd like to present to you, Mike D., and the listeners out there. I'll let you respond to that, Mike, and then any last words, and that's about all of the show for tonight. So go ahead and let me know what you think about that. Maybe you think nothing. The floor is yours.
Well, when you first said it, I think the first thing that came to my head is the Earth is a living entity. So it making sounds and shifting and moving things is really does make sense to me, because it is a living object, a consciousness, if you will, to it. I think the whole concept of Mother Nature making changes to the planet is not something. It's something that I believe in. So
you think that these loud creaking sounds are because of that, right?
Yeah. I think it has to do with the Earth itself. But who's to say that also at the same time some of these sounds are not natural? We do have a lot of underground bases. And maybe some of these sounds that people are hearing are coming from those bases, because we sure have a lot of them, and they're interconnected with these, from my research, from these tubes, these trains. So maybe that's a kind of resonance is picked up by people when they're reporting this phenomenon. Also, what you said too, maybe the Earth is shifting poles slowly. Even though I've heard that that's supposed to be a fast type of change, but maybe there's a slow shift of poles, and some of that sound that people are hearing is because of that shift.
That could be very possible. I think it could be a combination of all of those and many more. And unfortunately, we are out of time for tonight, Mike. Maybe you can join us on the next show, but regardless of that, I know Ira Robinson will be joining me next week on The Secret Teachings. If you would like the notes for this weekend's show, as well as the third part of this show next weekend, you can go to thesecretteachings.info. On the homepage, you will find a link for all three of these shows, a back-to-back-to-back 3-hour, total of 9 hours on UFOs, the concept of aliens, extraterrestrials, cylinder, cigar-shaped UFOs being reported all throughout our solar system, hollow moon, hollow earth, and so much more. The notes are available at thesecretteachings.info with all of the official photographs, some of them unofficial, some of them faked and changed and altered, with all of the NASA JPL links there, as well as some other details of moon anomalies. You can download that entire file for free. As always, at thesecretteachings.info, we ask you, because literally, ladies and gentlemen, I have put more than 10 hours just into obtaining these photographs and going through thousands of photos from NASA, putting this all together for you. I have done this on my own time. Any donations to The Secret Teachings are greatly appreciated, and any donations over $15, you will get a copy of either The Grand Illusion, Slaves to Perception, 700-plus pages, or you will get a copy of False Prophets and the Lovers of Children. Either one of those books, you just tell me which one you want. With any donations over $15, $30 donations, you'll get both PDFs, and I will send them directly to you from my computer right here. Until next week, I am Ryan Gable. I'm here today with my co-host, Mike D. Next week, I will be back with Ira Robinson. And if you haven't caught up on the shows we did this weekend, ladies and gentlemen, I would highly recommend going to thesecretteachings.info, downloading them for free, and getting prepared for next weekend. Mike, thank you so much for joining me on tonight's show. I had a blast.
Yes, me too. Thanks for everybody for listening out there.
Absolutely. Do the research, do the math, stop letting people tell you what to think, including myself and Mike D., and begin to connect the dots between seemingly unconnected people, places, and events in the world that seems so complex will actually begin to make sense. Spend some time looking through the notes that I've provided under the title Never a Straight Answer at thesecretteachings.info, and feel free to email me at rdgable@yahoo.com. That's rdgable yahoo.com. I'm Ryan Gable for Mike D and The Secret Teachings, signing off. We'll talk to you next week. Stay safe.